Welcome to Sleeping History, where we drift away from the loud legends and look gently at the real, quiet past. Tonight, we'll step softly into the world of colonial America, not the drama of rebellion or the grand speeches of famous founders, but the ordinary, exhausting life of the countless people whose names never made it into textbooks. Let's imagine a time before electricity, before supermarkets, before the world sped up. The air is chilly before sunrise. Your home is a cabin, perhaps built by your own hands, or inherited from the last person who tried their luck in this unforgiving new world. The walls are rough-hewn logs or weathered boards, chinked with clay and moss. Wind seeps through the cracks and creaks the door. There's a faint smell of wood smoke, of earth, of animals, and of people living close together. Your bed is not a soft place. Maybe it's a sack filled with straw or corn husks. Maybe a lumpy mattress sewn by your mother or grandmother and shared by siblings. Quilts and blankets are patchwork, each scrap a memory, and even on the best nights, warmth is fleeting. Sometimes you wake to find your breath clouding in the air above you. Sometimes you're awakened by a cough, a baby's cry, the restless shifting of others crammed into the same narrow space. There's no clock, but your body learns the rhythm of necessity. The day does not begin with a gentle stretch. Someone, often your mother or the eldest child, must rise first to coax the coals in the hearth back to life, blowing on the ash and feeding in dry twigs until the first flames appear. If the fire has gone out overnight, starting it again is an anxious task. Flint, steel and dry tinder must be coaxed into flame, or you might borrow a coal from a neighbor, carrying it home in a pan while your fingers go numb from cold. No matter the season, you begin the day with work. In winter, your toes curl away from the icy floor as you stumble into your clothes, garments patched and repatched, never quite warm enough. In summer, the early light creeps through cracks in the shutters, and the heavy air is thick with the scent of soil and sweat. You hear the first birds, or the crow of a rooster, if you're lucky enough to have chickens. Some mornings you rise before the birds, moving quietly so as not to wake the youngest children, gathering your wits for the chores that never change. Water is not at your fingertips. The well is outside, or maybe there's a spring down the hill, sometimes far enough that you dread the trip. The buckets are heavy, rough and cold, the path slick with mud in the spring, and treacherous with ice in winter. If it's your job to fetch the first water of the day, you brace yourself, stepping carefully, shivering as you draw up the rope, then hurry back, spilling as little as possible. If you're a child, your hands sting and go red, but you learn not to complain. Complaints are met with reminders that work is life. Before anyone eats, the animals must be tended. Livestock are precious, cows for milk, chickens for eggs, a pig, if you're fortunate. The barn is a simple thing, more drafty than your house. The cows need to be milked before dawn, their breath steaming in the cold, the sound of milk squirting into a tin pail, a small comfort in the half-light. Chickens are fed, their nests checked for eggs, though foxes or weasels might have visited in the night. Pigs grunt and jostle for scraps, and if you're in charge of the animals, you move among them with practiced care, watchful for signs of sickness or trouble. Indoors, breakfast is neither leisurely nor guaranteed. If there's cornmeal, you stir it into mush over the fire, the smell filling the small space as others shuffle in, rubbing their eyes and reaching for warmth. Maybe there's a bit of salt pork or bacon, left from last year's slaughter, fried crisp if there's fat to spare. Fresh bread is a rarity, saved for special days. More likely you have yesterday's loaf, or a hard crust softened in milk or broth. If the harvest was good, there might be apples or honey. If it was poor, you eat what you have, and dream of better. Meals are eaten quickly, sometimes in silence, sometimes with soft conversation, plans for the day, warnings about chores, reminders of tasks that must be finished before the sun goes down. Children learn early to listen, to pay attention, to hold their bowls carefully and not spill. Every scrap is precious, every crumb saved or given to the animals. You don't think of chores as something separate from life, they are life. The floor is swept, though it's only packed dirt, and will never truly be clean. Ashes are carried out, the fire raked and fed, and already someone is setting dough for bread, washing yesterday's clothes, spinning, weaving, patching, mending or minding the smallest children. If it's market day, or a neighbor is expected, there's extra bustle, clothes shaken out and brushed, hair tidied, shoes patched or feet scrubbed as best as possible. For many, though, the day stretches ahead with nothing but the cycle of work, feeding, cleaning, fixing, hauling, repeating the motions that their parents and grandparents performed, and that their children will learn in turn. The home itself is small, every inch used. Tools hang on the walls, food stores are tucked into corners, barrels and bins. The air is always tinged with wood smoke, the sourness of damp clothes, the musk of animals. In winter, there's a constant battle against cold and damp. In summer, against flies, mice and rot. If someone is sick, the whole household feels it. Work is shared, and worry seeps into every conversation. Breakfast ends, and the family scatters to their tasks. The men and older boys may go to the fields, or to a nearby job. The women and girls begin the endless work indoors and around the yard. Babies are swaddled and carried from place to place, never far from a watchful eye. But even in this relentless routine, there are small joys. The way sunlight slants through the window, a joke shared over the fire, the pleasure of a warm bowl held in both hands on a cold morning. Life is hard, but it is life, and each morning brings a new start, even if that start is as heavy as the bucket you carry from the well. Outside, the world is quiet but never empty. If you pause, you can hear the gentle hum of insects, the distant crack of an axe biting wood, the soft murmur of neighbors waking in their own homes scattered across the valley or up and down the village lane. Occasionally a dog barks or a cart rattles over rough ground, the wheels creaking in the dawn. Your feet know every inch of the yard, the uneven path to the barn, the stone at the edge of the well, the patch where vegetables struggled last season and will soon be planted again. If there is a garden, its needs are endless. Weeds pulled, earth turned, seeds planted by hand. Each row a gamble against frost, drought, or hungry pests. Children are sent to chase crows and sparrows, to watch for groundhogs, to learn the names of every growing thing. Hands are soon dirty, nails rimmed with soil, faces smudged with dust or the sheen of sweat. If it's a good year, the work feels lighter, and there is hope in every sprout. If it's a bad year, if rain fails or cold lingers, there is worry in every glance and a tightening of belts at every meal. Still the cycle continues. Life demands movement, and those who hesitate are left behind by necessity. Inside, the rhythm of chores becomes almost musical. A mother hums as she stirs the pot, a daughter sings softly while spinning or carding wool, the clatter of dishes and the scrape of broom bristles marking the slow hours of the morning. Boys practice knots or carve small toys from wood as they watch the fire, their minds half on play and half on the lessons that never end. On the best days, a neighbor stops by with news, a birth, a death, the arrival of a peddler or a traveling minister. Visitors are welcomed with what hospitality can be managed: a cup of water, a bit of bread, a chair near the fire. Gossip and laughter travel faster than letters, binding the scattered families of the settlement together in a web of obligation, memory, and mutual need. The work does not pause for weather. Rain means mud and more sweeping. Snow means shoveling paths, mending leaky roofs, and shaking out blankets to dry by the fire. In storms, animals must be checked again, windows shuttered, food and water hoarded until the sky clears. Illness can sweep through a family in days, slowing everything and demanding new efforts. Herbal teas brewed, bedpans emptied, extra firewood chopped to keep the sick warm. If you are a child, you learn by watching how to tie a knot, sharpen a knife, judge the thickness of porridge or the softness of bread, how to sense when a parent is tired or worried. If you are a parent, your own worries multiply, how to keep everyone fed, warm, healthy, safe. There is no margin for laziness. Every mistake or delay means more work for someone else. The morning flows into midday with hardly a pause. Tasks are ticked off and replaced with new ones. The hope of a break is rare, but sometimes when the sun is high and the work is done, a few minutes are stolen for rest, a seat on the porch, a drink of cool water, a moment to watch the clouds drift by. Even these moments are filled with plans, calculations, or silent prayers for rain, for luck, for health. Through it all, the land is both friend and foe. It provides food, shelter, the raw materials of life, but also asks for endless work, patience, and respect. Colonial mornings are never easy, but in every repeated motion, in every weary step, there is a stubborn pride, a sense that even in exhaustion, life can be made and remade, day after day by ordinary hands and hopeful hearts. As the morning ends, the sun climbs higher, and the next round of work begins, preparing the midday meal, gathering more wood, tending fields or spinning wheels. The day has only just begun, and already you are tired. By midday, the world outside your colonial home is brighter, but the work has not eased. If anything, it gathers pace as the sun climbs. Every task that could wait until after breakfast now demands attention, and the air inside is thick with purpose and with the residue of living. Wood smoke, boiling broth, wet laundry, sweat. The tools of survival are never far from hand. The broom, handmade from bundled twigs, leans by the hearth. Iron pots and kettles, blackened with soot, hang from hooks or rest atop the coals. Buckets and wooden tubs crowd the corners. A mending basket sits in the patch of sunlight by the only window, half filled with shirts and stockings awaiting repair. There's a rhythm to it all. After the first chores and breakfast, the house must be put to rights again. Ashes swept, spilled water mopped, crumbs brushed from the table, animal feed fetched for the midday meal. Someone, often a daughter or youngest son, is sent to refill the water barrel, bracing against the wind or sun, carrying each heavy bucket slowly, careful not to spill a drop. For the women of the house, the hours blur together. The next meal must be planned. If there is bread to bake, dough that was set to rise at dawn is kneaded on a board dusted with flour, sometimes coarse, sometimes mealy, always precious. The oven, if there is one, must be fired and watched. More often, bread is baked in a Dutch oven in the hearth, carefully turned and checked so it doesn't burn. If meat is to be had, it must be prepared. Maybe there is a chicken to pluck, salted fish to soak, or beans to shell and set boiling with a bone for flavor. Nothing is wasted. Potato skins become soup, bacon grease is saved for frying, bones for broth. The vegetables, gathered from the garden, or preserved from the root cellar, are peeled, sliced and simmered until the aroma fills the house. Outside, the garden and yard are living, growing things that need constant tending. Weeds spring up overnight, and the fence that looked sound last week may have a loose rail or a hole where rabbits slip through. Children are sent to chase birds from the corn, gather eggs, pull carrots or onions for the pot. Even toddlers find small jobs, handing pegs for laundry, gathering kindling, feeding kitchen scraps to chickens. Laundry is never far from mind. If it is washing day, every hand is pressed into service. Clothes are soaked in wooden tubs, scrubbed on boards, or with river stones, wrung out and hung to dry on lines strung between trees or over bushes. In cold weather, fingers ache from the icy water, and drying must be done indoors by the fire, turning the house damp and close. Repair is another unending task. Tools break, axes must be sharpened, handles mended, pots patched with wire or lead. Clothes need constant fixing, socks are darned, holes patched, buttons sewn on with thick thread. Shoes are often resoled with scraps of leather or old harness, and even the best coat may have a dozen repairs. Children's hands are busy too. They shell peas, shuck corn, wind yarn, fetch water, and learn the crafts and habits that mean survival. Tying knots, whittling pegs, gathering wild herbs for teas or medicine. Older children, especially boys, might be sent to the fields or to hunt, their eyes sharp for movement in the underbrush, their ears tuned for the snap of a twig or the rush of wings. At times a neighbor appears at the gate, sometimes a welcome sight, sometimes a warning that news or trouble is coming. Visitors are offered what can be spared: a cup of buttermilk, a piece of bread, a seat near the fire. Stories are exchanged: who has fallen ill, whose cow has strayed, what was seen on the road. These moments of connection are rare but precious, a break in the day's relentless repetition. But conversation cannot last. The day's heat grows, and flies and insects invade. Someone sweeps the porch, beats dust from rugs, scrubs a pot. If there is soap to be made, it is a major undertaking. Ashes and water combine to make lye, then mixed with rendered fat and boiled until thick, poured into molds and set to dry. The sharp scent lingers for hours, filling the house, clinging to hair and clothes. Even in the smallest home, order is a constant struggle against the forces of dirt, chaos, and time. Floors are swept but never truly clean. Windows are wiped, but the dust soon returns. Food is stored in barrels, bins, sacks, and crocks, but mice and bugs are clever and persistent. Every day brings new challenges. An animal escapes, a fence falls, a tool goes missing. When the weather is good, work spills outdoors. Fields are weeded, potatoes hilled, beans staked, fences mended, and the barn cleaned of muck and old straw. The garden is a patchwork of promise and disappointment, some rows thriving, others stubbornly bare. In the heat of summer, sweat stings your eyes and blisters form on your hands, but the work must go on. In early autumn, the harvest begins, a race against rot, pests, and the fading light. If the weather turns, everyone scrambles. Rain means muddy floors and wet wood, a rush to bring animals under shelter, to save laundry from the line, to check for leaks in the roof or gaps in the walls. Storms mean watching the sky, securing shutters, praying that the wind will pass without tearing off the roof or flattening the fields. As the sun begins to drop in the sky, the work continues, but there's a faint hope for rest, maybe a cool drink, a few minutes sitting on the step, a laugh or a story shared as the last jobs are finished. The heat fades, the shadows grow long, and you feel the tiredness in your bones, a deep, honest weariness that is both the cost and the reward of a day's survival. And so, from midday into afternoon, colonial life is defined by labor. Every movement, every task, is a small act of endurance, part of the quiet, exhausting struggle that shapes the hours, the years and the lives of those who built their days and their world with patient, ordinary work. The sun stands high and slowly begins its descent, throwing longer shadows across the fields and the packed earth outside the cabin. The busiest hours may be past, but the pace does not let up. If anything, the late afternoon brings a different sort of urgency, a need to finish what can be finished before light fades, before the safe circle of the home closes in again for the night. If you live on a farm or at the edge of a town, there is always a tool in your hand or a task in your mind. Maybe you are in the garden, knees deep in weeds, working row by row with practiced fingers, sorting the useful from the wild. The sun warms your back, sweat gathers at your brow. You lose yourself in the small, repetitive motions, pull, twist, drop, move to the next. A stone works loose in the path, and you stoop to collect it, adding it to the pile that grows each season, stones that will someday become a wall or a border for the herbs by the door. Inside, the work continues. The eldest daughter kneads dough for the next day's bread, hands dusted with flour, muscles aching from effort. A mother inspects dried beans, tossing out the ones that show mold or the telltale holes of insects. Pots are scrubbed, jars checked for cracks, wooden spoons whittled smooth where a child chewed the handle. In the quiet, someone sings, a tune passed down through generations, words faded or mumbled, but the melody a comfort as steady as breath. Laundry is taken from the line, stiff with wind or sun, folded carefully and set aside. Shirts are sorted, socks paired, everything checked for tears or stains. In poor weather, clothes dry by the fire, the house thick with the smell of damp cloth and smoke. If there is time, someone starts to mend, a patch on a knee, a button sewn back with careful stitches, the work slow and satisfying, a small victory over the wear of living. Boys might be sent to the fields with a dog to chase away crows or rabbits. If the harvest is near, there is talk of the weather, hopes for sun, worries about early frost. Someone checks the traps set the night before. If luck holds, there is a rabbit, a squirrel, maybe even a brace of quail for the pot. Older sons sharpen tools, split wood for the hearth, oil the hinges on the barn door, or haul stones for the next fence. Younger children help where they can, or invent games from what is at hand. They skip along the worn path to the well, race to see who can gather the most kindling, or help collect eggs, laughing at the stubborn hen who always pecks at fingers. Even the smallest have tasks, picking berries, spreading straw, shooing chickens from the kitchen step. Visitors in the afternoon are rare, but always a ripple in the day's current. A neighbor might come with a message or a trade, perhaps a basket of apples in exchange for a dozen eggs, a length of homespun cloth for a pot of lard, a few minutes of news from the world beyond the farm. Sometimes there is an unexpected arrival, a peddler with bright ribbons, tin spoons, or a precious packet of tea, a preacher seeking a meal and a bed, a distant cousin on the way to a new life. Hospitality is a duty, but also a pleasure, a way to break the day's monotony with conversation, curiosity, and sometimes a glimpse of things unknown. The chores go on, water is fetched again for the evening meal, the garden is watered if rain has not come, livestock are checked for wounds or illness. The woodpile is inspected, will there be enough for tonight? For the week. The barn is swept, the henhouse closed up, a wary glance cast at the sky for signs of storm or trouble. Inside, preparations for supper begin. The last of the day's bread is sliced. Soup is set to simmer, beans and salted pork, combined with whatever herbs are at hand. Sometimes there is a pie, the crust thick and uneven, the filling sweet with apples, berries, or even pumpkin. Children are sent to wash, hands and faces scrubbed at the basin by the door, feet wiped clean with an old rag. The table is set, simple and worn, wooden bowls, pewter spoons, mugs for whatever drink can be managed. The light fades. Someone lights a candle, a rushlight, or simply tends the fire, poking it to life and coaxing flame from coals. Shadows stretch across the walls. The world outside grows quiet, the sounds of day replaced by the chirp of crickets, the lowing of cattle, the soft rustle of wind in the trees. After supper, there are more chores, dishes to be cleaned, scraps to be fed to animals, the fire to be banked for the night. The floor is swept one last time, clothes laid out for the next day, water brought in so no one must stumble out into darkness if thirst or need calls before dawn. If the day has gone well, there is a moment to sit together by the fire, stories told, songs sung, maybe a lesson from a battered book, if someone in the family can read. Children drowse in laps, older ones mend socks or twist thread, a father whittles or sharpens a blade, a mother knits or cards wool, and all the while, outside, the world holds its breath. Foxes move along the edge of the woods, an owl calls from the dark. The house settles, creaking as the night air cools the beams and boards. In these hours, the exhaustion of the day settles like a blanket over every bone and muscle. It is not the exhaustion of defeat, but of work done and survived, of another day weathered in a world that offers little and asks much. You feel it in the ache of your hands, the heaviness of your eyes, the comfort of a shared silence. Sleep comes early in a colonial home, for dawn will come again soon, and with it, the cycle of labor begins anew. Yet, as you drift, there is comfort in routine, a sense that however hard the day, you have shaped it with your own hands, endured it with your family, and that for one more night, you are safe inside, while the vast wild world waits just beyond the door. The world of colonial America was shaped not just by routines, but by the steady, never-ending struggle to grow, gather, and keep enough food to see another season. In the cities and towns, people bought their bread and meat at markets, but for most families living in villages, along backcountry roads, or scattered across lonely clearings, the harvest was everything. Each day's security depended on the stubborn, back-breaking, hope-fueled work of coaxing life from the land. If you walk out beyond the small yard, past the patched fences and trampled grass, you find yourself in the family's most important possession, the field or garden. The soil might be thin and rocky, black and loamy, or stubborn red clay, but no matter what you start with, every inch of good earth is won from the wild, cleared of stones and brush, chopped from forest by axe and sweat, roots wrestled out with bare hands, years spent in the slow process of turning wilderness into farmland. In spring, there is a sense of racing against time. As soon as the ground thaws and can be worked, everyone is in the field, adults digging furrows, children dropping corn or beans, the youngest scattering handfuls of seed for turnips, cabbage or carrots. The rhythm is constant. Stoop, plant, cover, step, repeat, row after row. Birds watch from the treetops, quick to snatch an unattended seed. Rabbits and deer slip in at night, and someone must rise at first light to check for tracks and mend what was trampled. Tools are simple, sometimes homemade, sometimes borrowed from a neighbor or bartered for at great expense. A heavy iron plow if you're lucky, a wooden hoe, a spade with a handle whittled smooth by years of call-used hands. The work is back-breaking, hands blistered, backs bent, necks sunburnt. By midday, the sweat stings your eyes, but you work on, knowing that every seed matters. Some years, the rains come at just the right time. Seeds sprout in neat rows, leaves unfurl, hope grows with every inch of green. But other years bring too much rain, and the fields flood, or too little, and the ground cracks, seedlings shrivel, and the whole family watches clouds with longing, sometimes kneeling together to pray for mercy. As the weeks pass, there is always more to do. Weeds spring up faster than crops, and must be pulled before they choke the young plants. Insects arrive in swarms, caterpillars, beetles, grasshoppers, every kind of pest you can name, each one hungry for the same food you hope to harvest. Some days, the whole family is bent double, picking bugs from leaves, shaking beetles into jars of soapy water, hoping to save what little will grow. For those who keep animals, the routine is just as demanding. Chickens need tending, eggs collected, foxes and weasels driven off. Cows are milked before dawn, and at dusk, their breath hanging in the cool air. Pigs are fattened on scraps and windfall apples. If you are lucky, there is a horse to help haul wood or pull a plow, but even the smallest beast is precious, and must be fed, watered, and watched for signs of illness. Food is never taken for granted. In late summer, the first ripe tomatoes, beans or squash, are a small celebration. Children taste the first sweet corn, apples picked straight from the tree, berries gathered in baskets, hands stained red and purple. But every meal is shadowed by the question, will there be enough? Autumn brings a new rush of urgency. Harvest is a race against time. Before frost comes, before rain ruins the beans, before wind shakes the corn, every hand is pressed into service. Corn is cut and stacked to dry, beans picked and shelled, potatoes dug from the earth, carrots and turnips pulled and piled in bins. Apples are gathered by the bushel, some eaten fresh, most stored or made into sauce, cider, or vinegar. The barn and cellar fill up. Apples, squash, pumpkins, baskets of potatoes, barrels of beans, strings of onions and garlic hanging from the rafters. If you are fortunate, there are jars of preserves, honey, or maple syrup. If you keep bees, the harvest is sweet and sticky, every drop precious. If you hunt or trap, smoked venison or rabbit, strings of dried fish, or salted pork join the stores. Preservation is itself a labor. Meat must be salted and smoked, vegetables pickled, fruit dried or cooked down. There are no guarantees. Sometimes the jars don't seal. A barrel of apples turns sour. Mice or rats find their way in and ruin days of work. Every week someone checks for mold, rot or spoilage, moving stores to the coolest corner, patching leaks, resetting traps. Winter is always on the mind. In good years, the cellar is full. The shelves sag under the weight of jars, bins and sacks. In bad years, you ration every bite, smaller portions, more broth, more bread, made with what little flour is left. Hunger is a quiet companion, not always spoken of, but always felt. In the midst of all this, there are moments of joy. The first meal from a new harvest, a pie baked with wild berries, bread still warm from the oven. When the work is shared, stories are told in the field, songs sung over baskets of beans, laughter exchanged even as hands ache and feet burn from standing. Yet the worry never truly fades. Every family knows someone who lost a crop to hail, or a winter that dragged on too long. Everyone has lived through hungry seasons. Charity is given when it can be. A sack of corn left at a neighbor's door, or an extra chicken shared when illness keeps someone from the fields. For those living along the coast or near rivers, fishing adds a rhythm of its own. Nets are mended, boats bailed and patched, bait gathered, and traps set. The catch is uncertain. Some days baskets overflow, other days you return empty, hungry and tired. Oysters, clams and eels are gathered at low tide, smoked or salted for the weeks ahead. In every season, every meal is the result of labor. Food is life, but also struggle, measured not just in abundance, but in the effort it takes to grow, gather, preserve and protect. The table is always set with gratitude, but also a quiet, unspoken anxiety about the days to come. As the sun drops and the fields cool, you look at what you have, what has survived storm, pest and hunger, and know that for tonight at least, you have enough. Tomorrow the work begins again. The air grows cooler as the sun tilts toward the trees. Shadows stretch over the yard, and the fields begin to quiet, save for the last calls of birds and the low, distant voices of neighbors returning from their own long labors. Your hands are dirty, your body tired, but the work is not finished. There are always a few last things to be done before dark. The garden, picked clean through the afternoon, must be checked one final time. A stray bean or a tomato that escaped notice is carefully plucked and added to the basket. Someone chases a hen back to the coop, gathers the last eggs, or refills the water trough so the animals will settle for the night. The fence line is walked, eyes searching for new gaps, a fallen branch, the fresh tracks of a raccoon or a wandering dog. Any new problem means more work tomorrow. Back inside, the day's harvest is examined and sorted. Potatoes are spread on the floor to cure, apples stacked in bins, the best kept for winter, the bruised ones eaten soon or cooked down into sauce. Someone checks the jars of beans and corn set to dry on the shelf. If the weather's cool and dry, they'll last. If it's damp, you worry about mold and the quiet, creeping loss of so much effort. Supper is prepared with whatever the land and the day have offered. The meal is rarely fancy, sometimes nothing more than a stew of beans and root vegetables thickened with a little flour or a piece of salt pork. When the harvest has been good, maybe there is a pie for dessert, or a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. But often the real flavor is in the work that brought each bite to the table, the relief of having enough. Food is precious but never wasted. Bones from supper are saved for broth, potato skins and carrot tops for feeding pigs, apple peels for cider or vinegar. Anything truly inedible goes to the chickens, the garden heap, or buried to keep pests away. Even the dishwater finds a purpose, carried outside to cool, then tossed where it will do the least harm. After supper, the kitchen is a hive of quiet movement. Dishes are washed with water warmed on the fire, and a scrap of lye soap. Bowls are stacked, knives wiped clean and hung on their hook. The last crumbs swept up, the table wiped down, the embers of the fire stirred and banked for the night. For many families, the evening brings a brief, cherished pause, a time to sit together in the dim glow of a candle or a lantern, hands busy with small necessary tasks. Someone cards wool for spinning, another whittles pegs or repairs a tool. Children twist new rushes for the lamp, pluck feathers for pillows, or sit quietly in a parent's lap, soothed by the gentle cadence of a story or a hymn. There is comfort in this routine, a sense of safety in the familiar sounds, the low murmur of voices, the clink of pottery, the crackle of the hearth. But even now, worries hover at the edge of thought. Will the weather hold? Will the stores last through winter? Will illness come? There are always memories of lean years, tales of neighbors who lost everything to fire, flood, or misfortune. Night falls quickly in the countryside. As the world darkens outside, the house feels smaller and more precious, a bubble of warmth and light in the vast wilderness. Windows are shuttered or covered, the doors barred with a heavy piece of wood. The family draws closer, checking and rechecking that all is well before the lights are put out. If you are very lucky, the evening is peaceful, a moment to rest your sore muscles, to share laughter or song, to feel for just a little while that the world outside is held at bay. But sleep is always a thin thing, easily broken by the howl of a dog, the creak of the timbers, or the wind rattling loose shingles on the roof. The work of the day seeps into your dreams, the repetition of harvest and hunger, of planting and worry, of weather and hope. You know as you drift, that tomorrow will bring more of the same, the ceaseless effort to draw life from a stubborn land, the endless dance with nature and time. But for now, there is rest. Oh! You lie in bed, listening to the sounds of your family breathing, the faint embers ticking in the hearth, the night's hush settling over the fields you've worked and the food you've earned. In this quiet, you find a small, honest pride, not in plenty, but in having endured, in having made it through one more day, and in the hope that, come morning, you'll have the strength to do it all again. In the quiet between chores, when the main rush of fieldwork or animal tending eased for an hour, the labor of making, mending, and maintaining the family's few possessions took over. Nothing in a colonial home was ever simply bought, used, and thrown away. Every shirt, every blanket, every scrap of soap or drop of candlelight was the result of hands working, minds solving, bodies wearing themselves down, just to keep the household afloat. Clothing was a daily preoccupation. Few families had more than a handful of garments for each person, a set for every day, a set for Sunday, and perhaps one for special occasions or harsh weather. Each piece was a product of months, even years, of effort. Wool came from sheep that were fed, sheared, guarded from wolves and cold. The fleeces had to be washed, picked clean of burrs and dirt, and then carded, teased into soft, fluffy strands ready for spinning. Spinning itself was a slow, patient art. In the corner by the window, a mother or daughter sat at a spinning wheel, or worked with a drop spindle, twisting the carded wool into thread, keeping an even tension, coaxing out thin, strong yarn. There was a rhythm to it. The creak of the wheel, the soft whir, as the fibers twisted and grew longer, the pile of finished thread accumulating at the spinner's feet. Weaving came next. Some households had a loom set up in the main room, a great wooden structure that took up precious space but was as important as the hearth. The woven cloth grew inch by inch, as the shuttle passed back and forth, colored threads forming stripes or patterns depending on what dyes could be managed from plants, bark, or imported powders. The loom was both tool and companion, its gentle clack and thump a background to conversation, singing, or the telling of family stories. Every piece of fabric was precious. Old shirts and dresses, worn thin, were patched and repatched, then cut down for children, or turned into rags, then into quilt squares, and at last into the scraps stuffed into pillows or braided into rugs. Nothing went to waste. The best dresses might be handed down from mother to daughter, re-dyed and altered as fashions shifted, always with a mind toward usefulness and thrift. Shoes were a luxury, not a given. Most were handmade, cobbled from leather tanned on the farm, or bartered for at great expense. Children often went barefoot, except in the coldest months, their feet toughened by work and play, the soles of their shoes patched until there was nothing left to patch. Soap and candles too were homemade and hard-won. Soap began as a bucket of ashes from the hearth, mixed with water to make lye. This caustic liquid was then combined with fat saved from cooking, boiled and stirred until it thickened, poured into wooden molds and left to harden. The whole house would fill with the sharp, biting scent of lye and animal fat. Soap was precious, used sparingly, sometimes traded with neighbors for other necessities. Candles were made from tallow, beeswax if you were lucky, or even animal fat that made the room smell faintly of the barn. Wicks were twisted from scraps of linen or hemp. Dipping candles meant standing for hours, repeating the motion, dip, lift, cool, dip again, until a handful of smoky, uneven tapers could be laid aside to brighten the next dark night. Candlelight was never wasted, work was planned around the sun, and only the barest glow burned after the last chore was done. Mending was constant. There were no stores to rush to for new things, and no one could afford to let a small tear become a ruin. Shirts were patched at the elbow, stockings darned at the heel, pants let out and taken in as children grew and shrank and grew again. Needles were precious, sometimes inherited, sometimes traded for with eggs or a clutch of wool, and losing one was cause for real distress. Bedding and blankets were another focus. Quilts were made over many months, scraps saved and stitched into warmth for winter. Pillows might be filled with feathers plucked one by one from ducks or geese, or with dry grasses or old rags when nothing better could be had. Beds were often simple pallets or rope frames, their cords tightened each season, their comfort a reflection of time and luck. Furniture too was homemade or handed down. A table built by a grandfather might wobble from a dozen repairs, each leg a different length or shape. Chairs were mended with new rush seats, or with strips of rawhide. Every item told a story, not of fashion or luxury, but of stubborn practical persistence. Children joined in these chores as soon as they could hold a needle, turn a spindle, or fit a patch to a hole. Learning these skills was as much a part of survival as learning to read the weather or split kindling for the fire. The work was repetitive, sometimes dull, but laced with a kind of quiet pride. Each patch a memory, each candle a promise against the night. Evenings were often spent with hands busy, mending, spinning, carding, sewing, twisting wicks or combing wool by the fire. As stories were shared or hymns sung, the family's labor continued, each movement a step in the unending dance that made the house a home, that kept everyone clothed, warm and ready for another day's work. There were moments of beauty even in these chores, the feel of soft fresh spun wool, the first light of a new candle in the darkness, the satisfaction of a shirt made strong again, a quilt warm and thick for the coldest winter night. But the labor never truly ceased. For every shirt patched, there was another needing repair. For every batch of soap, another pile of ashes to be sifted and more fat to be saved. For every candle burned, another set to be dipped and dried. This was the quiet, invisible exhaustion of colonial life, the hidden work that never made it into the stories of great men or grand events, but which shaped every hour, every home, every hope for the future. In these small tireless acts day after day, the real substance of survival was found, a testament to hands that would not give up, to families who endured, and to a world built from the ground up, one patch, one thread, one flame at a time. In the late afternoon, as the sun angles lower, and its light slants through dusty windows, the house feels full of quiet movement. Even after a day's labor in the fields or garden, the family's work inside is far from finished. The table is cleared of the last scraps of the midday meal, and becomes a workbench, a place for mending, making, and the slow business of keeping things whole. Someone sits with a pile of socks, worn thin at the heel, toes poking through, the yarn faded from too many washings. Each pair is examined carefully, the thin spots found, a gourd or stone slipped inside to stretch the fabric, and then with practiced hands, the darning needle draws thick thread in neat looping patterns. It is slow work, but soothing in its way, a rhythm as regular as breathing, as familiar as the voice of a mother humming by the fire. Nearby, a shirt waits to be patched, the knees of a child's trousers reinforced with a scrap cut from an even older garment. Every patch is a memory, a piece from a dress once worn to church, or a bit of cloth handed down from a relative long gone. The stitches are strong, not pretty. They are meant to last through the next round of chores, the next tumble in the yard or sprint to the well. In another corner, the spinning wheel turns. Wool, picked clean of burrs and tangles, is pulled out in thin strands, twisted into strong, fine thread. The spinner's foot works the treadle, hands guiding the fibers with skill learned by necessity. Piles of new yarn grow at her feet, destined for the loom where, in the quiet evenings, the family will gather to weave the winter's blankets, or a new length of cloth for a shirt or a dress. The loom is a fixture in many colonial homes, a frame of wood so large it often claims an entire room, but too precious to do without. Here the warp is set, and the shuttle passed back and forth, each throw adding another line to the fabric. Sometimes, if luck or trade has brought color, stripes or patterns emerge, a little beauty wrestled from the plainness of necessity. The sound is steady, almost musical, the thump and click of wood, the gentle tension of hands at work. Soap making is an ordeal in itself, a special project that occupies the whole household from morning until late at night. First, the ashes from many weeks of fires are leached for their lye, a careful process, as too much lye makes soap harsh, too little, and it won't clean. Fat saved from cooking is melted in a great iron pot, the lye poured in, and the mixture stirred until it thickens and starts to look right. The scent fills the house, sharp and biting, sticking in your hair and clothes. When it's done, the soap is poured into wooden molds and set to cure. Every bar is precious, and every crumb is saved for the next time the washboard is called into service. Candle making happens when fat is available, or, if the family keeps bees, when the honey harvest is done. Tallow or beeswax is melted, and wicks twisted from rag or old thread are dipped again and again, layer by thin layer, until the candles are thick enough to last through the long nights. The finished candles are hung from a rafter or tucked away in a box, their number counted and recounted as the dark season draws near. As the family works, stories are shared, tales from the old country, memories of hard winters, gossip about neighbors, lessons and warnings for the young. There is laughter too, and songs passed from parent to child. The hands never stop moving, even when the mind wanders. This is how skills are taught, how the youngest learn the difference between good thread and bad, how to set a patch that won't pull loose, how to make soap that cleans but doesn't burn. Maintenance is a chore for every member of the family. Tools are inspected, their handles checked for splinters or cracks, blades sharpened on whetstones, and the iron oiled against rust. Barrels are repaired with new hoops, baskets mended with fresh willow or ash splints, brooms retied and scrubbed for the next day's work. Even the house itself demands constant attention. The roof is checked for leaks, shingles replaced one by one, gaps in the walls stuffed with clay or moss before the cold can creep in. Floors are swept, but the dirt always finds a way back. Windows, if there are any, are washed with vinegar and cloth, and wooden shutters are adjusted so they close tight against the wind. Insects are trapped, mice chased out with traps baited with crumbs. Every crack, every creak, every loose board is a reminder that the world outside is always pressing in. The resourcefulness required in colonial homes is more than a skill, it is a habit of mind, a culture passed down with each generation. Nothing is wasted. Old shoes become patches for new, scraps of leather are saved for mending harness or lacing boots, bits of iron or bone are turned into buttons, handles or toys. When something is truly used up, it becomes fuel for the fire, ashes for the lye barrel, or compost for next year's garden. Children watch and learn, their own small hands practicing knots, stitches and repairs under a parent's careful eye. They are given small tasks, trusted with ever greater responsibility, and praised for ingenuity. A doll fashioned from a corn husk, a whistle carved from a branch, a clever way to keep the chickens from escaping the yard. As dusk deepens, the home glows with the faint golden light of a few candles or the hearth fire. The day's work is nearly done, but not quite. Blankets are shaken and laid out for the night, embers stirred for one last burst of warmth. A final check is made of every door and window. Everyone moves a little slower, bodies heavy with effort, but the work brings with it a deep, satisfying weariness, a sense that though the world is never easy, it can be endured with enough skill, patience and care. And so, the endless loop continues. Each day in colonial America is built of 1,000 small efforts, the sum of which is simple survival. There is no applause, no reward beyond the safety and warmth of another night, the hope that tomorrow will be as manageable as today. But in the soft hush of a home at peace, with the last thread tied off and the last tool put away, there is a feeling quiet, unspoken but real, that every small act matters, that by mending and making, by holding things together, you hold the world itself at bay, one patch, one candle, one careful stitch at a time. Health in colonial America was as fragile as it was precious, a fact that hovered in the air of every home and haunted even the simplest daily routines. Illness and injury were not rare events. They were steady companions, never far from thought, shaping habits, fears, and even the rhythms of hope and prayer. The world was full of risks that modern life so easily forgets. A cough that lingered, a scratch that festered, a fever that refused to break. Any of these could turn a normal day into a crisis, could threaten to unravel a family's careful balance between survival and disaster. There were no hospitals for most, and only the rarest towns boasted a doctor or surgeon. Even then the cost of a visit was high, and trust in a stranger's skill was not easily given. Every family relied, first and last, on their own knowledge, passed from mother to daughter, neighbor to neighbor, learned from bitter experience, and sometimes the folklore of many lands. The world of colonial medicine was a patchwork of old remedies, wild plants, prayer, and stubborn hope. When someone fell ill, the house became a place of anxious whispers and careful steps. Beds were moved closer to the hearth for warmth. water was heated for teas and poultices, and everyone took on extra chores so the sick could rest. Children learned to lower their voices, to fetch and carry, to keep fires burning and siblings quiet. Mothers and grandmothers brewed strong-smelling brews of chamomile, yarrow, or boneset, wrapped throats in flannel, rubbed sore joints with goose fat, and watched through long nights for any sign of improvement. In the absence of doctors, every household became its own small infirmary. The family's medicine chest, often no more than a box or shelf, held dried herbs, bitter powders, a few precious glass bottles or jars of salves, and maybe, if fortune had smiled, a little honey or strong spirits for dulling pain. A simple cut was never ignored. It was washed, packed with clean rags, or a mixture of cobwebs and honey, if available, bound tightly, and watched for days. The fear of infection was constant. A red streak, a swelling, or the smell of rot meant dread, prayers, and whatever remedies could be tried. When fever struck, the sick were cooled with cloths dipped in well water, or warmed if chills shook their bones, and someone sat by the bed through the dark hours, listening for every breath. For the lucky, recovery came slowly, in days or weeks, the house returning to its careful routines as strength returned. But sometimes the sick room became a place of mourning. The family gathered close, comforting each other as best they could, and then finding the strength to go on. Childhood was especially perilous. Many children never reached adulthood. A sudden illness or accident could take a life in days or even hours. Parents lived with this knowledge, grieved for it, feared it, yet continued to hope, to teach, to laugh and play when they could. Each birthday, each step from cradle to walking, each year survived, was a victory worth quiet celebration. Pregnancy and childbirth too were filled with danger and uncertainty. Most births took place at home, attended by mothers, sisters, and maybe a neighbor with a reputation for steady nerves. The nearest doctor might be a day's ride away. Women prepared for months, sewing baby clothes, weaving blankets, saving up special foods, and teaching older daughters what to expect. When labor began, the rest of the family waited outside the door, listening for the first cry, praying that both mother and child would see the dawn. Accidents were common: a slip with an axe, a fall from a horse, a burned hand, a broken bone. All were risks faced every day. If a limb was shattered or infection took hold, the choices were grim: a crude amputation, the hope of healing, or sometimes simply acceptance and care for the dying. Strong spirits, sometimes distilled at home, were used to dull pain or calm a fever, but often, comfort came only from the presence of family, the touch of a hand, the warmth of a song or a whispered prayer. Disease was a shadow that hung over every community. Smallpox, measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, and other illnesses swept through towns and villages, sometimes taking whole families, sometimes moving on as mysteriously as they came. Quarantine meant closing the house, refusing visitors, waiting out the sickness in fear and isolation. News of disease traveled quickly, neighbors warning each other, sharing what remedies they could, helping to bury the dead when the worst had passed. Yet, in the midst of so much danger, people found ways to endure. Families grew skilled at reading symptoms, at nursing each other through bad spells, at celebrating recovery and remembering those they lost. Every household had its own recipes and rituals: a special tea, a charm hung by the door, prayers said at dusk, a twig of rowan or holly over the hearth. The seasons shaped the risks. In summer, fevers spread with mosquitoes, water turned foul, and wounds festered more quickly. In winter, the cold brought coughs and chills, the air in closed homes heavy with smoke and illness. Spring was a time of hope, but also of exhaustion, when the stores ran low and bodies were weakest from months of meager food. Despite the constant threat, life went on. Children played, lovers courted, neighbors gathered for quilting bees, barn raisings and Sunday services. In hard times the community responded. Food was brought to the sick, firewood chopped for widows, and news of remedies or doctors shared freely. There was faith too, faith that God watched over the home, that strength could be found in family and neighborly kindness, that each day survived was a blessing. People prayed for health, for recovery, for the wisdom to know what to do. Sometimes prayers were answered, sometimes there were only memories, and the slow work of grieving. Evenings after a bout of sickness were bittersweet, stories told of those who had pulled through, laughter mingling with sorrow, the sense that in this fragile world, every day of life and health was a small miracle. As you listen to the gentle creak of the house at night, the soft murmur of voices, and the slow steady breathing of those you love, you understand the true cost of survival in colonial America. It was not just the work of hands hands or the labor of the fields. It was the endless vigilance against the unseen, the quiet heroism of care, the stubborn hope that, against all odds, tomorrow would come, and with it, another chance to live, to mend, to love, and to endure. As evening settled across the settlement, a hush often fell over the homes where sickness lingered. Curtains were drawn, lamps dimmed, and the ordinary sounds of laughter and play grew quieter, replaced by the soft footfalls of family members moving with care. Outside, neighbors noticed when a yard was still, when a house remained shuttered, even as dusk deepened, and word would travel quietly from door to door, "They're nursing a fever. The baby's taken ill. Old Mr. Tuttle hasn't been seen since market day." In a world without clinics or urgent care, illness was everyone's business, not from gossip or cruelty, but from the recognition that survival depended on community as much as on individual strength. If a home was stricken by a lingering cough, a fever, or the pallor of unknown sickness, the first response was always home care. Water was heated over the fire, linens changed as often as could be managed, and every window was opened for a spell, no matter how cold, hoping fresh air would carry off the pestilence. Grandmothers and mothers led the rituals of care, their knowledge gathered from long memory and years of trial and error. When to wrap a throat in warm flannel, when to cool a brow with a vinegar cloth, how to mix the right tea from roots or leaves, and when to simply sit quietly, holding a hand through the worst of the night. Children learned not to be afraid of the sick room, but to respect its silences and its needs. A child might be tasked with running a message to a neighbor, drawing water from the well, or sitting quietly beside a sibling, while a parent slept for a few precious minutes. The youngest grew up knowing that the line between health and harm was thin and uncertain. They learned too that kindness and courage were as essential as bread or milk. If the illness dragged on or seemed to worsen, word might be sent to a neighbor known for her healing skills, a woman who knew which bark eased pain, which poultice drew out infection, whose hands were steady, and whose mind was sharp. She would arrive with her bundle of dried herbs, a pocket of old bones and bottles, and the quiet confidence of someone who had seen much and survived more. In some communities, these women, midwives, herbalists, sometimes called granny women, were respected and trusted. In others they might be whispered about, envied for their knowledge, or suspected of knowing too much. For certain fevers or wounds, the family might try to send for the town doctor, but the doctor was a rare figure. His presence felt more in rumor than reality. He might live miles away, his arrival unpredictable, summoned by horseback, sometimes delayed by the weather, a broken bridge, or other emergencies along the way. His bag held medicines that smelled sharply of spirits or tar, bottles with labels that seemed more magic than science, laudanum for pain, calomel for purging, perhaps a jar of leeches. There were no guarantees. Sometimes the doctor's visit brought relief, sometimes only comfort, sometimes just a heavy fee, and the slow acceptance that nature would run its course. When illness took a turn for the worse, and a family prepared for the worst, the community came quietly closer. Neighbors brought food, split firewood, offered to tend animals or fields. Older children might be taken in for a night or two so the sick room was calmer, quieter, the parents able to focus their efforts. There was no question of refusing help. It was understood that no one survived alone, that each family's strength was woven from the care of all. If a death came, the rituals of loss were both deeply private and gently public. The body was washed and dressed by family, or by close friends, often in the same room where the sickbed had stood. Candles were set burning, and someone sat vigil through the night, reciting prayers, reading from the family Bible, or simply remembering the life that had passed. Word was sent through the settlement, sometimes by foot, sometimes by a rider, if the distance was far, and neighbors would arrive with covered dishes, with flowers picked from the roadside, with hands ready to help with burial, or to take over the day's chores. Funerals, when possible, gathered everyone who could walk or ride. The preacher spoke of faith, of mystery, of the hope of reunion. The mourners sang old hymns, and after stood together in small groups, remembering, comforting, planning how to help the family left behind. Food was shared in silence or in soft conversation. Children played nearby, their voices rising and falling, a reminder that life, even in its most fragile moments, always continued. For those left behind, grief was a process as long as any illness. There were mornings of disbelief, days where the house felt too quiet, where the missing person's shoes or shawl seemed to wait by the door. Yet, the rhythm of necessity never stopped. The fire needed tending, bread had to be baked, water fetched, animals fed, Friends and neighbors checked in more often, bringing news, a treat, or simply sitting to share the silence. Over time, stories would be told of how strong the sick one had been, how bravely a child had faced fever, how kindly the neighbors had responded. Sometimes, superstitions and old beliefs crept in, a shoe placed under the bed to ward off evil, a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, a penny on the windowsill to pay for safe passage. Whether from faith or folklore, these small acts soothed fear and made meaning from loss. Yet, the greatest lesson learned through each cycle of sickness and sorrow was one of resilience. Life continued, sometimes changed, sometimes harder, but always forward. Children grew into adults, their memories of sickness and care becoming the seeds of their own wisdom, their own readiness to meet the next crisis. Neighbors who had stood at a graveside together became friends for life. The scars of loss marked every family, but so did the quiet pride of having endured, of having done what was needed, of having held each other close in a world where so little could be controlled. And so as each evening settled over the settlement, as lamps flickered and voices grew soft, families found comfort in the ordinary miracle of another day, survived. In the hush that follows the labor and the losses, there was always room for hope. Hope that tomorrow would be healthier, that strength would return, that kindness would be remembered and passed on. In this way, the people of colonial America wove a tapestry of care, grief, and resilience, one quiet day at a time. Imagine, for a moment, needing to fetch help, visit a neighbor, or simply send a message to another town. In colonial America, such tasks were never quick or easy. The world outside your home stretched wide and wild, and the very act of traveling, even for the simplest reason, was a trial of patience, endurance, and luck. Most families lived at a distance from their nearest neighbors, sometimes separated by a patchwork of woods, fields, muddy lanes, or stony pastures. The footpath you walked every day to the well or the barn might vanish after a few hundred yards, swallowed by undergrowth or snow. There were few maps, and even fewer reliable signs. A journey that today might take a few minutes across town, down a paved road, could mean hours of walking, guessing, retracing your steps, or waiting out the weather. If you needed to visit a neighbor, you would set out early, boots thick with mud or stiff with frost. The world was quieter and larger, each sound carrying far in the still air, the rustle of leaves, the call of a bird, the distant bark of a dog, or the echo of your own footsteps. Sometimes, if the road was known and the sky clear, you could make good time. But often, you were slowed by things out of your control, a fallen tree, a swollen creek, a rutted cart track filled with water, or a patch of wild brambles snaring your clothes. Every journey demanded care and planning, a knowledge of landmarks, the bent oak, the old stone, the hollow where wildflowers bloomed in spring. If the need was urgent, a call for help, news of illness, or an accident, the journey grew longer still. Someone had to be sent, often the strongest or swiftest walker, sometimes a child trusted to find the way, carrying nothing but a message, and a hope that they would return before nightfall. In winter, snow and ice made travel slow and dangerous. In summer, the heat and insects sapped your strength. For those lucky enough to have a horse or a cart, the burden was a little lighter, but the roads were rough, sometimes impassable. Wheels stuck in mud or ruts, axles broke, and sometimes the only option was to abandon the cart and continue on foot. Bridges were rare, often simple logs thrown over streams, and every crossing was a risk. Rivers could rise overnight, cutting off whole settlements, isolating families for days or weeks at a time. Communication beyond the nearest farm or village was even more uncertain. Letters were precious and rare, sometimes carried by travelers, sometimes entrusted to the post rider. If the route passed your way, the cost of sending a letter was high. Families saved for months to afford a message home, and when a letter arrived, it was read and reread, sometimes by the light of the same candle that had illuminated its writing many weeks before. For most, news came slowly, on the lips of travelers, merchants or peddlers, passing through with tales of distant places, of storms and ships, wars and politics, births and deaths. The world felt vast, each piece of information a treasure, each rumor a thread to the wider tapestry of life. People learned to listen, to weigh what they heard, to compare stories, and judge the truth for themselves. Errands that seem simple today, a trip to the mill, the blacksmith, or the meeting house required careful planning. You measured not just distance, but the state of the road, the weather, the health of your animal, the contents of your bag. A broken shoe, a storm rolling in, or the sudden onset of illness could mean turning back, rescheduling, or relying on the kindness of a stranger met along the way. Travel for business or court, to a market or a distant family, was often a journey of days. you packed food, water, extra clothes, sometimes bedding, or tools, knowing that inns were rare, expensive, or non-existent outside the largest towns. Nights might be spent in a stranger's barn, in a lean-to by the road, or huddled beside your horse for warmth. Travelers moved in groups when possible, safer from wild animals, robbers, or simply the perils of losing the path in the dark. The roads themselves were a test of resilience. Rain could turn them to mud, wheels sinking to the hub. In spring, the melt brought floods, and in fall, leaves hid stones and roots that could trip you or your horse. Dust choked the air in dry months. Bridges, when they existed, were often makeshift, slick with moss or rot. Travel by water, canoe, raft, or small boat, was sometimes quicker, but brought its own dangers, sudden storms, snags and rapids that could dash hopes and cargo alike. Children learned the art of watching the world, memorizing landmarks, reading the sky for signs of rain, and listening for the approach of travelers. It was an important skill to know which path led to a neighbor, which trail ended at the old mill, which bend of the river marked the halfway point to town. Getting lost was not just an inconvenience, it could be deadly, especially in winter or after dark. Social gatherings, a church service, a wedding, a barn raising, a market, were cherished not just for their joy, but for the opportunity to catch up, to hear news, to share what little you knew of the wider world. Afterward, the walk home was made together if possible, lanterns bobbing along the track, voices echoing into the night, the comfort of company pushing back the vastness of the dark. Even for those living in larger towns or near the coast, travel was never certain. Ships might be delayed for weeks by bad weather. A letter from Europe might take months. News of wars, laws, or even new fashions arrived long after the fact. People learned patience, to wait and hope, to treasure the moment when a familiar face returned, or a longed-for message finally arrived. All of this made life in colonial America both lonely and closely knit, a world where isolation was real, but so was the importance of every connection, every visit, every letter. Each journey was a test of endurance, each message, a hope, each reunion, a celebration of survival. And so, the roads and paths of colonial America were more than just lines through the woods. They were lifelines, carrying not just people and goods, but the weight of longing, love, worry, and hope. Every step was hard-won, every arrival an achievement. Each trip, across the field, through the forest, or down the river, was another thread in the vast, exhausting fabric of life, in a world where nothing came easy, and nothing could be taken for granted. Evening brings its own anxieties to the traveler, and to those left waiting at home. In the fading light, the forest deepens to shadow, and every bend in the road feels longer. For a parent whose child was sent to fetch help, or a spouse waiting for news from town, time stretches out, measured in the steady drip of water from the eaves, the tick of a fire burning low, or the restless shifting of a dog at the door. The safe return of any traveler, no matter how short the journey, was a cause for quiet relief, and sometimes prayer. Inside, while waiting, families kept busy. A lantern was trimmed and set in the window, casting its faint glow onto the path, a beacon to guide the way. If the weather turned rough, rain lashing the roof, thunder echoing in the hills, anxiety rose. Every knock at the door, every gust of wind, brought a flurry of movement. Boots pulled on, shawls thrown about shoulders, a child peering out into the darkness, hoping for a familiar figure at the gate. Sometimes the wait lasted hours. Sometimes, when roads washed out or a bridge gave way, it lasted a day or more. The uncertainty was its own kind of exhaustion, a tension that sat heavy in the bones, the mind running through every what-if, the heart counting the minutes. It was a lesson in patience, in hope, and in the unspoken knowledge that not every journey ended as planned. When a messenger or traveler finally arrived, muddy, cold, but safe, the relief was nearly physical. Boots were set by the fire to dry, a cup of hot broth or cider pressed into tired hands, and news shared at last. The telling was always slow, as the traveler caught their breath, and the family listened, not just for information, but for the reassurance that, for now, their small world was intact. Yet the wider world was always pressing in. News from beyond the local settlement of war, trade, politics, or distant kin traveled in a patchwork way. A merchant's ship delayed in port meant shortages, or sudden price changes at the store. Word of disease in a neighboring town would spread caution and fear, changing plans for travel or trade. Sometimes a single letter or visitor would change a family's fortunes, or sow the first seeds of change that would ripple for years. The arrival of the mail, when it came, was an event. The post rider, a solitary figure with a sturdy horse, saddlebags weighed with precious letters and packages, was greeted with excitement and questions. Who had written? What news of the old country? Was there a reply to the message sent months ago? The letter, once received, was a treasure. It might be read aloud many times, the words committed to memory, the paper carefully folded and stored in a box or Bible. Sometimes, if the family could not read, a neighbor or child would take on the role of reader, their voice carrying the thoughts and affections of distant loved ones into the firelit room. But the absence of news was a presence in itself. When letters failed to arrive, or a long-expected traveler was delayed, worry became a silent companion. People learned to guard their hope, to be strong in waiting, to rely on faith and routine to fill the empty hours. For those whose work required more distant travel, a journey to court, a visit to a family member several towns away, the preparations were serious. Lists were made, supplies gathered: hard bread, dried meat, a blanket or cloak, flint for fire, a pouch of coins if any could be spared. Each day's progress was uncertain. A single storm could wash out roads. A thrown shoe could delay travel for days. Illness or accident far from home meant relying on the charity of strangers, an act of vulnerability, but also a testament to the silent bonds between travelers. In a world where everyone sometimes was far from home, journeys made for pleasure were few and far between. A wedding in a neighboring town, or a harvest fair at the county seat, might be planned for weeks. Families traveled together, sometimes with neighbors, their wagons forming a little caravan, their laughter and song carrying on the breeze, as they made slow progress down familiar roads. The return was just as slow, and always with a sense of accomplishment. Even the youngest children understood that any journey could become a story, a memory to be shared at the fireside in winters to come. Travel and distance shaped relationships. Sweethearts courted in slow, careful visits, the anticipation stretching over weeks or months. Friends who lived a few miles apart might see each other only a handful of times a year, their bond kept alive by letters, shared work at harvest or barn raising, or the simple joy of reunion after a long separation. Absence was woven into the fabric of love and friendship, making each meeting precious. Even within a single settlement, the effort required to gather people together lent a gravity to every communal event. When a bell rang for a meeting, a birth or a crisis, people came not out of idle curiosity, but out of understanding that their presence mattered, that to show up, to witness, to lend a hand or a word, was a vital thread in the web of survival. And so in the world of colonial America, distance was both a burden and a teacher. It taught patience, endurance, and a kind of humility before the unpredictable. It made every arrival a cause for quiet celebration, and every message a small miracle. In the long evenings when travelers rested and letters were read by the wavering light, families found comfort in togetherness, a circle drawn tight against the uncertainties of the world. With every journey completed, with every word received or sent, the exhaustion of distance was felt not just in tired feet, but in the heart. Yet from that effort grew a strength and intimacy, within families, between neighbors, across miles and seasons, that shaped the colonial world more surely than any road or river. When the sun finally slid behind the distant hills and the last chores were finished, you might think the people of colonial America could finally rest. But real rest, complete, guiltless and free, was a rare luxury. Even as the world outside grew quiet, the mind remained busy with duties that were invisible but no less real than the day's labor. Every community, no matter how scattered, lived under the weight of expectation. There were rules to be followed, spoken and unspoken, and a constant subtle pressure to appear diligent, pious, and respectable in the eyes of neighbors and kin. The same people who helped you at harvest or nursed your child through sickness could also judge your choices, spread gossip, or quietly shift their support if your reputation slipped. Sunday was the heart of this system. From the smallest village to the largest town, the Sabbath was observed with solemnity and a kind of collective anxiety. No matter how tired you were, how sore your hands or feet, everyone was expected to clean themselves, put on their best clothes, even if those clothes were worn thin, and make their way to church. The walk could be long, the pews hard, the sermons endless, but absence was noted. To stay home without good reason was to risk not just a raised eyebrow but questions, warnings, and even fines in some places. Children were watched carefully, taught to sit still and quiet, their minds wandering as the minister's voice droned on. Men and women were separated by pew, families clustered together, all eyes forward, everyone listening for not just the word of God, but for any hint of censure, for news, for the smallest detail that might change their fortunes in the eyes of the community. Church was more than a place of worship, it was the social court of the colony. Here marriages were announced, disputes aired, apologies demanded, and sometimes made. The success of your crops, the health of your livestock, the condition of your home, these were all weighed alongside your attendance and your generosity to the poor. Even private struggles, sickness, grief or poverty, became public matters, discussed in whispers or prayers, always a little too loud to ignore. On other days, social life was built around obligation as much as pleasure. When a neighbor needed help, raising a barn, harvesting hay, digging a well, you were expected to show up, bringing whatever tools, food or strong backs you could spare. To refuse, or to show up late or empty-handed, was to risk a stain on your character that could linger for years. Every gathering had its rituals, barn raisings and quilting bees, apple parings and corn huskings. These were not just opportunities for work, but tests of cooperation, generosity and manners. Young people met and courted under the eyes of their elders. Older women traded recipes, remedies and advice, often as much for the sake of reputation as for necessity. Men exchanged news, argued politics, or swapped work, but always with an ear for who was upstanding, who was struggling, and who was falling behind. Gossip was a force as powerful as any law. Stories traveled quickly, sometimes shifting as they moved, and reputations could rise or fall on the turn of a phrase. The careless word, the slight seen or imagined, the act of kindness performed or withheld, each became a story, added to the invisible ledger that every community kept. Children learned early to mind their manners, to show respect, to remember that every action, no matter how small, could be weighed in the scales of neighborly opinion. For women the burden was especially heavy. A clean home, obedient children, mended clothes, well-cooked meals, these were the signs of a good wife and mother. Any slip, any rumor of neglect or disorder, could bring scolding or shame. Yet, women also relied on each other, in childbirth, in sickness, in the endless work of making a house into a home. The bonds formed in these shared struggles were deep and enduring, but never free from judgment. Men too, lived with pressures, to be strong, to provide, to be honest in trade, to defend the family's honor, to pay debts and fulfill promises. Failures or weakness, real or imagined, were hard to hide and harder to forgive. Even children bore the weight. A child's misbehavior reflected on the whole family. A lazy or unruly son, a careless daughter, could mark a household for years. School, if there was one, was strict. Lessons came as much from discipline as from books. Holidays and celebrations, rare and eagerly anticipated, were also fraught. Every feast or gathering was a chance to prove your generosity, your skill, your place in the community. To be left out was to feel the chill of exclusion, a loneliness sharper than any winter wind. Through all of this, the desire for rest, true rest, remained elusive. Night might bring quiet, but the mind replayed the day's events, worried over tomorrow's tasks, rehearsed conversations and planned apologies or favors. The pressure to maintain standing, to avoid scandal or shame, was constant, humming beneath every moment, like a background melody you could never quite ignore. Yet, from this web of obligation and watchfulness grew a powerful sense of belonging. Neighbors relied on each other not just for survival, but for meaning. Stories were told and retold, each generation adding their own victories and losses to the shared memory of the place. In times of trouble, the community closed ranks, offering support in the same breath as criticism. Still, for many, the exhaustion was as much emotional as physical. The longing for privacy, for a moment to be oneself without judgment, was strong. Some found it in the quiet of the woods, in the solitary act of fishing or mending a fence at the edge of a field. Others cherished the stolen hours after dark, when the world finally grew still, and the voice of conscience could be softened by the steady rhythm of the hearth. When sleep finally came, it was deep and dreamless, a respite from the noise and the scrutiny, a surrender to the body's need for rest. And in the morning, the cycle would begin again, a world where every word and gesture mattered, where rest was earned not just by work, but by the endless silent labor of reputation and relationship. As evening drew its veil over the settlement, homes that stood apart all day seemed to grow closer in the hush. Light leaked through cracks in wooden shutters, and from within came the muffled sound of families settling into the brief and precious hours between dusk and sleep. This was the time when the outside world's judgment, if not forgotten, at least faded into the background, when the hard-won privacy of the home became a gentle, flickering shelter. Yet even here, in the softest glow of a candle or the warmth of a shared fire, the invisible weight of community lingered. Conversations often circled back to the day's encounters, the neighbor's raised eyebrow, the subtle hint in a minister's sermon, the memory of a quarrel or a favor asked. Parents spoke in low voices, careful of little ears, quietly strategizing how to mend a reputation, smooth over an offense, or ensure their children learned the lesson that standing in the community was as vital as bread or shelter. Children, for their part, sometimes sensed this atmosphere, even when they did not understand its cause. The tension in a parent's voice, the sudden hush when someone passed by the window, the rare but unmistakable sadness at a story of exclusion or loss. These moments became part of the education of colonial childhood, lessons absorbed alongside those of letters and numbers, of planting and mending and prayer. Still, the home could be a refuge. Here, in the flicker of firelight, old tales were told, stories from the old country, legends of ancestors, the quiet recitation of psalms or proverbs. Here, hands found comfort in work that was for the family alone, a shirt patched with extra care for a beloved child, bread baked not for show, but for the simple pleasure of a meal shared in peace. Here, laughter could come more easily, sometimes at the expense of the outside world, in whispered jokes or the gentle ribbing that families used to knit themselves together. But even laughter was sometimes cautious. In places where authority was harsh, where the magistrate's word could mean a fine or a public shaming, jokes were told softly, stories of mischief or rebellion saved for the most trusted ears. Children learned to keep family secrets, to know which neighbors could be trusted, which ones might carry tales back to those in power. For many, true privacy was found not within four walls, but outside, under the vast indifferent sky. Some found solace in a solitary walk at dusk, following the same footpaths trodden by their parents and grandparents, letting their thoughts wander free from scrutiny. Others lingered over chores at the edge of a field, the repetitive motion of hoeing or mending a fence giving their mind room to roam. These moments of solitude, rare as they were, became treasures, a way to remember oneself as more than a role, more than a reputation, but as a person with dreams and doubts and wishes that would never be shared aloud. Or women sometimes gathered for spinning or quilting bees, and these gatherings could be both a balm and a trial. The talk was as much about the work as about news and reputations, advice and comfort offered in the same breath as gentle gossip or warning. In these spaces, alliances were formed, sympathies exchanged, and sometimes, beneath the surface, real friendships flourished, rooted in shared struggle, and in the quiet understanding that for all the rules and roles, everyone longed for kindness and understanding. Men found their own escapes, a hunting trip, a visit to a neighbor's barn to help with a stubborn animal, or a few stolen moments at the mill or the blacksmith's forge. Here, conversation could turn away from the constant weighing of status, and in the company of those who shared their burdens, a man might lay down his cares, if only for a while. The balance between togetherness and solitude was delicate. Too much withdrawal, and suspicion might grow. Was there trouble at home? Too much public striving, and a person might be accused of ambition or pride. Families walked this tightrope every day, learning when to stand out and when to fade into the background, how to accept help without appearing needy, how to offer comfort without seeming to meddle. Night brought a final respite. When the candles were snuffed and the last ember glowed in the hearth, the world outside was held at bay by little more than darkness and hope. Lying in bed, the worries of reputation and responsibility might still stir, but in the safe company of loved ones, the body's need for sleep finally won out. In dreams perhaps, some found the freedom denied them by day, a chance to be unobserved, unburdened at peace. Yet, even in sleep, the day's pressures left their mark. People rose early, not just from habit, but because dawn always brought with it new chances to mend what was frayed, a fence, a friendship, a family's good name. In this way, the rhythm of colonial life moved ever forward, shaped as much by invisible rules and relationships as by the visible labor of field and home. The exhaustion was quiet, but it was real, a fatigue of spirit as well as body, the cost of belonging to a world that watched, measured, and sometimes forgave. Still, from this effort grew a kind of strength, a knowing that survival depended not just on crops or skills, but on patience, humility, and the careful tending of every bond that made a home a refuge and a community a family. Childhood in colonial America was not the gentle time we might imagine from stories or old paintings. Instead, it was woven tightly into the daily struggle of survival, a noisy, sometimes joyful, often wearying presence that demanded constant attention, vigilance, and effort from every adult in the household. From the earliest morning hours, the sound of children echoed through the home, a baby's thin cry rising in the dark, the shuffle of small feet on the cold floor, the murmur of older siblings hurrying to their first chores. A colonial home was rarely quiet. Even as parents ached for a few more minutes of rest, the day began in a flurry of needs: feeding, dressing, soothing, scolding. The line between work and care was blurred. Babies were rocked while dough was kneaded. A toddler clung to a mother's skirts as she swept or churned. Older children fetched water, carried firewood, or watched their younger brothers and sisters as the adults turned to the heavier labor of the day. The demands were endless. Infants needed to be fed, nursed if possible, or given porridge thinned with water or milk if the mother's strength failed or there were too many mouths to feed. Small children needed help with every task, washing hands and faces in cold water, tying shoes, pulling on patched clothes. A single slip, a child's tumble into the hearth, a fall from a ladder, a mouthful of unripe berries, could mean disaster in a world where help was far away and medicine was uncertain. Supervision was a duty shared by everyone. If a parent was busy in the garden or at the loom, an older sibling took over, watching the baby or keeping the toddlers out of harm's way. Aunts, uncles, and neighbors sometimes stepped in, especially during times of crisis or when a new child arrived. But the constant watchful care was tiring, a background hum of anxiety and effort that never really faded, even in sleep. Yet, children were not just a burden, they were workers too. From as soon as they could walk and talk, they were given jobs, scattering corn to the chickens, gathering kindling, picking bugs from plants, or keeping a sharp eye out for predators near the barn. The youngest learned by watching, their small hands imitating the motions of older siblings and parents, their voices repeating the same instructions day after day. To refuse a chore was rare. To do it badly meant a lesson repeated, sometimes with stern words or the quick smack of a wooden spoon. As they grew, children were expected to take on more responsibility, both at home and in the wider community. Boys learned to split wood, to drive a plow, to trap and hunt. Girls were taught to spin, sew, cook, and tend younger siblings. School, if it existed, was squeezed in between the season's tasks, a luxury for some and a necessity for those who hoped to read the Bible, keep accounts, or write a letter. Learning came in snatches, at the end of a long day, or during a rare moment of peace by the fire. But even these lessons were never separate from the larger effort to survive. A child's success in reading or figuring numbers was celebrated as another way the family might prosper, another tool for facing the world's challenges. Every skill learned, every story remembered, was a shield against hunger, danger and ignorance. Illness and accident were constant fears. A cough that lasted too long, a fever that burned hot for days, the sudden silence of a child who had been playing moments before, these were terrors that haunted every parent's dreams. Families lost children to disease, to accident, to the relentless hazards of daily life. The grief was private, but also communal. Neighbors mourned together, comforted each other, and shared the burden of loss, always hoping the next season would be kinder. Still, joy found its way in, stubborn and bright. There were games played with stones or sticks, songs sung while working, races down muddy paths, laughter at silly faces or clumsy pets. Children's voices echoed in the fields, chasing each other through the tall grass, calling out the rhymes and riddles that had been passed down for generations. Even in a world of worry and want, a child's laughter could lighten the hardest day. At night, the family gathered together in whatever space could be spared. Siblings shared beds, huddled together for warmth, whispering secrets and hopes until sleep claimed them. Parents listened for cries in the dark, for the sound of restless feet, or the sharp cough that signaled trouble. In the quiet, stories were told, tales of bravery and faith, of the old country and the new world, of ancestors who had endured even harder times. Through it all, children were a living reminder of both the struggles and the hopes of colonial life. They demanded effort, patience and energy that sometimes seemed impossible to give. But they were also the future, the reason to plant one more row of corn, to mend one more shirt, to rise again at dawn, when the world seemed too heavy to bear. The exhaustion of raising children in colonial America was total physical, mental, emotional. It shaped every hour, every decision, every bond between parent and child, between neighbor and kin. But in the midst of it, life persisted, noisy, messy, fragile, and in its way, profoundly beautiful. The story of each family was written in the muddy footprints on a swept floor, in the coal-used hands of a young girl learning to spin, in the tired but loving gaze of a parent watching over a sleeping child. And so, as the days and years turned, the work of raising children never really ended. It was a cycle, a promise renewed with each new birth, each hard-won milestone, each moment of shared laughter or comfort. In this way, the ordinary, exhausting work of care became the quiet heart of colonial life, holding families and communities together through every trial and every dawn. Evenings in the colonial home, though quieter, rarely meant the end of parental labor. After supper was cleared and embers glowed in the hearth, a new round of work often began. Parents checked on sleeping infants, tucked the youngest into straw-filled mattresses or nests of patchwork quilts, and soothed those who fussed against the dark with soft words and gentle songs. The older children might be set to smaller chores, stirring the ashes, fetching the last water of the night, folding laundry, or helping to wash the bowls and wooden spoons used for supper. With so many bodies crowded into a small space, privacy was nearly impossible. Babies cried, toddlers squirmed, siblings whispered, and sometimes quarreled, their voices rising and falling in the darkness. Some nights exhaustion meant tempers frayed, a parent's voice sharpening, a child's tears quick to come. Yet, more often than not, a kind hand, a shared blanket, or a quiet story settled the worst of it. Forgiveness was a nightly ritual, an unspoken part of family life, necessary for facing another day side by side. Sleep itself was precious and uncertain. Infants woke hungry, needing to nurse or be rocked back to sleep. Children, chilled by winter drafts or made restless by fever, would crawl into their parents' bed or call out in the night. Nightmares were soothed with gentle shushing, with prayers whispered in the flickering firelight, or with old stories, tales of brave children lost in the woods, and found again, of wise animals, or of guardian angels always near. Parents lay awake, even after the children's breathing slowed and the room grew quiet. A mother counted chores undone, a father planned repairs or worried over the coming harvest. Both listened, always, for the noises that spelled danger, the crack of a limb in the night, the lowing of a cow, the barking of a dog, the ominous silence that meant a child's fever had spiked or a cough had worsened. Yet, amidst the worry, there was the sweetness of togetherness. A baby's warm weight curled against a mother's side, the tangle of children's feet and hands under quilts, the comfort of shared breath in the stillness. These moments, a child's sigh, a sleepy smile, the rhythmic rise and fall of little chests, gave meaning to every hardship. It was here, in the darkness, that the bond between parent and child deepened, a promise that no amount of exhaustion could break. Education was woven through every day and night, not only in formal lessons, but in the way children watched their parents, copying their words and gestures, absorbing their hopes and anxieties. A parent's patience or anger, their kindness or fear, all became part of a child's inheritance. Skills were handed down in quiet moments, a father teaching his son to carve a whistle, a mother showing her daughter how to mend a tear, an older sibling explaining the best way to balance a bucket or sweep a hearth. These lessons were vital, practical, but also deeply personal. Children learned to measure the world through their parents' reactions, the way a mother's face tightened at the sight of a bare pantry, the hush that fell when a neighbor's name was mentioned, the celebration of a child's first attempt at spinning, or the pride at reading aloud a line from the family Bible. Loss, too, was a part of childhood. The death of a sibling, the disappearance of a pet, or the empty place at the table after a hard winter, all were felt sharply, shaping both children and parents. Mourning was shared, tears allowed, but the need to continue, to care for the living, gave every day a sense of gravity and purpose. Despite these hardships, love endured, sometimes fierce, sometimes gentle, but always present in the thousand small gestures of daily life. A mother braiding her daughter's hair with fingers roughened by soap and water, a father hoisting a tired child onto his shoulders for the walk home, a hand reaching across the table to steady a trembling chin. In the quiet hours, parents dreamed for their children, not of riches or leisure, but of simple safety, enough food, warm clothes, the promise of another spring. Each milestone, a first tooth, a first word, a successful harvest, was marked with gratitude, for it meant the family had endured another cycle, outlasted another season of danger and want. Children, for their part, found resilience in each other. Siblings became friends, rivals, protectors and teachers. Their games played in the mud or snow, with scraps of wood or bits of cloth, taught cooperation and cunning, bravery and compromise. Their laughter was a counterpoint to the adults' worries, a reminder that even in the harshest world, joy could bloom. As time passed, children grew into the same worries and responsibilities their parents had carried. The rhythm of exhaustion and love, of work and rest, continued through generations. The memory of a mother's lullaby, a father's story, or an older brother's comforting arm, lived on, quiet and steady, shaping the next round of caretakers and dreamers. And so, in the stillness before dawn, with a family gathered close in sleep, the world outside was held at bay. Parents, though tired beyond words, found peace in the presence of those they loved, in the knowledge that, for one more night, they had kept their children safe and warm. The exhaustion lingered, but so did hope. The hope that tomorrow would bring health, laughter, and the promise of another day survived, together. The world outside a colonial home was beautiful and dangerous, full of promise and threat. The land that gave food, timber, and water also gave storms, wild creatures, and endless uncertainty. For every sunrise that promised hope, there was a frost that threatened the crops, a howl in the night, or a cloud of insects that turned the day's work into a losing battle. Colonial life meant not only enduring the labors of home and family, but also facing a world that seemed always just a little bit wild, a little bit hungry, and never quite safe. From the moment a settler arrived in a new place, the battle with nature began. The first task was to clear enough land to build a shelter, cutting down trees with axes, pulling out stubborn roots with hands and ropes, piling rocks into rough borders. Each new clearing was a wound in the forest, a patch of earth claimed by sheer effort and protected by endless vigilance. Even after the house was raised and the fields fenced, the forest pressed close, its shadows a reminder of how quickly all this order could vanish. The weather was the greatest and most unpredictable enemy. Colonists learned quickly that the sun could burn just as fiercely as the cold could kill. Summer brought heat that wilted crops, left the land parched, and sometimes brought fire, fields and forests crackling with dry leaves, smoke thickening the air. Thunderstorms rolled in from the horizon, turning midday to night, wind tearing at roofs, rain flooding the yard and carrying away seeds, tools, and sometimes even hope. The clap of thunder might scatter livestock or frighten children, and every flash of lightning was a reminder of the thinness of shelter, the fragility of home. In winter, the cold was a different kind of danger. Snow piled up against doors and windows, drifted over fences, and made every trip to the well or barn a test of strength and endurance. Wood had to be chopped and hauled in every day. The fire watched night and day to keep the family from freezing. Water buckets froze solid if left too long, fingers and toes grew numb, and sometimes black with frostbite. Storms howled through the night, the roof groaning and creaking, icicles hanging from the eaves like teeth. When the wind found a crack in the wall or a gap in the roof, the house shivered and everyone inside felt it. Spring was a season of hope and anxiety. Melting snow meant mud, slick and deep, bogging down carts and trapping the feet of animals and people alike. Seeds had to be planted as soon as the ground could be worked, but late frosts could kill the tender shoots, turning weeks of labor into disappointment overnight. Rain was welcome, until it became too much, washing away soil, drowning roots, and sending streams surging over their banks. Every season had its pests and threats. Insects arrived in clouds, devouring leaves, boring into fruit, laying eggs in the crevices of house and barn. Mice and rats chewed through stores of grain, made nests in the straw, and carried disease into the home. Birds picked at seeds and berries, crows gathering in the fields like little armies. Larger animals, raccoons, foxes, and sometimes bears, prowled the edges of the yard at night, stealing chickens or scaring livestock. Even deer, beautiful and prized for their meat, could devastate a young garden in a single night, their tracks a mocking trail through ruined rows of corn and beans. At the edge of every settlement, the forest waited. Its darkness was both a source of fuel and game, and a place of fear, full of wolves and mountain lions, wild boars and snakes, unknown sounds that pricked the hair on the back of a child's neck. Stories were told of ghosts and witches, of travelers lost forever among the trees, of dangers both real and imagined lurking just out of sight. A walk to the well after sunset was a little adventure, a journey through the woods was an act of courage. Fire was a constant worry, both as friend and enemy. The same flame that warmed the home and cooked the food could leap from hearth to roof, from a candle tipped by a careless hand to the walls and beams that held a lifetime's work. Every family kept buckets and blankets ready, every child knew the signs of danger, every neighbor was alert to the smell of smoke. Floods and droughts came with no warning, each bringing its own kind of hardship. Too much rain and the crops rotted, the roads washed out, cellars filled with water and mud. Too little and the earth cracked, wells ran dry, cattle grew thin, and whole communities faced hunger. There was no way to predict, no way to control, only to endure, to save what could be saved, to share what little remained with neighbors in need. Work never truly stopped. It shifted with the seasons and the weather, with each new challenge from the world outside. Fences had to be checked and mended, storms knocked them down, animals dug under, rot crept along the posts, roofs leaked and needed thatching or shingles. Wells caved in or dried up, demanding new holes dug with aching hands. Trees fell in storms, blocking roads, crushing sheds or homes, providing wood but also more labor, more worry. Children were taught early to respect the land and its dangers. They learned to read the sky for signs of change, to listen to the animals for hints of coming storms. Stories passed down through families warned of the coldest winters, the hungriest summers, the years when locusts or caterpillars left nothing but bare branches behind. These memories shaped every plan, every moment of hope, every small celebration when the weather was kind and the harvest was good. Even in the heart of towns, where neighbors were close and the streets were busy, nature found its way in. Streets flooded, wells soured, and animals escaped their pens. The scent of rain, the bite of frost, the roar of wind against the shutters, all these were reminders that in the end people were guests in a world that did not bend easily to their will. Yet, there was beauty too, in this endless contest. The glow of a sunlit field after rain, the sparkle of icicles on bare branches, the quiet hush of snow settling over the land, the wildflowers blooming at the edge of a clearing. In the brief pauses between storms, families would gather on the porch, watching the clouds drift by, telling stories of seasons past and seasons yet to come. But the effort was constant, the exhaustion real. To live in colonial America was to always watch the sky, to listen for danger, to feel the muscles in your arms and back aching with the work of keeping the wild at bay. Even as you slept, the world outside was busy, winds blowing, water rising or falling, animals moving through the night. A life built on land hard won, always from the world just beyond the door. Even after years spent on the same land, with fences built and fields claimed, colonists never truly relaxed their vigilance against the wild world pressing in from every side. There was always an awareness that nature was not a backdrop, but an ever-present force, unpredictable and often indifferent to human plans. Each year brought new tests of patience, new anxieties, and a deep, persistent kind of tiredness that no night's sleep could ever quite erase. People became quiet students of the world around them, developing an almost superstitious respect for the smallest signs of change. A sudden wind from the east, the odd silence of birds, the scent of rain long before the sky darkened, all became omens, warnings that shaped decisions and moods. In a home where everything depended on the land, even dreams were shaped by weather. A good rain, a long thaw, a dry week in harvest season, could become prayers whispered in the darkness or silent bargains made with God or luck. There were rituals and routines for every season. Spring was a time of hope, but also anxiety, as everyone watched for the first green shoots, hoping late frosts would not claim them. Midsummer brought its own fears, storms, drought, and the ever-present hum of insects rising with the heat. Every day began and ended with a glance at the sky, a hand testing the wind, a quiet calculation of what the land might do next. To cope with this uncertainty, families developed habits and superstitions meant to win favor or ward off harm. Some hung horseshoes above their doors, or tucked a sprig of rosemary in the rafters for luck. Children were taught not to speak certain words during storms, not to leave the door open at dusk, lest spirits, insects, or the chill creep in. These customs blended practical wisdom with hope, a way of making sense of a world where so much was out of human hands. Tools and techniques evolved in a constant dance with the land's demands. Fields were rotated, cover crops planted, and families learned to read the soil's moods. Some years corn grew tall and strong, in others blight or beetles ruined whole harvests. Families saved seeds from the best plants, sharing them with neighbors and passing them down through generations. It was a kind of living memory, hope for a better year stored in a jar on a shelf, or buried in the rich dirt of a well-tended garden. Animals too became both help and hazard. Cows and pigs meant milk and meat, but also more mouths to feed, more work each day, and greater risk if a fence failed or a wolf passed through the woods. Chickens were a blessing, eggs and meat for the table, but they attracted foxes, raccoons and hawks. Every loss, every feathered body found in the morning grass, was a reminder of how thin the line was between plenty and want. Some dangers were invisible, but ever present. Water, so necessary, could become poison if a well soured, a stream overflowed, or disease crept in. People learned to watch for odd tastes or smells, to boil water when sickness spread, and to dig new wells at the first sign of trouble, a job that took days of digging, risking cave-ins, and hauling stones by hand. At night, the wild world grew louder. The cries of animals, the rustle of branches, the sudden hush before a storm, all these sounds filtered into dreams and shaped a kind of restless, alert sleep. Parents slept lightly, ready to rise at the first hint of trouble. Children learned to listen, to fear the sound of a fox in the henhouse or the scratch of a mouse in the pantry. Yet, there were moments of adaptation, resilience, and small victories. Over time, families learned which trees to plant for shade or shelter, how to thatch a roof so it would shed rain and snow, how to build a cellar deep enough to keep food safe from heat and cold. Community played a vital role. Neighbors came together to raise a barn felled by wind, to share seeds and stories, to help recover from disaster with food, tools, or simple encouragement. Still, the effort never truly ended. After a storm, there were branches to clear, leaks to patch, animals to round up and comfort. After a drought, there was the slow work of coaxing life back into the fields, of rationing the last of the grain, of finding hope in the green shoots that pushed through cracked earth. While every success was tempered by caution, every bounty by the knowledge that fortune could change with a single cold night or heavy rain, the psychological cost of this vigilance was subtle, woven into daily life like the grain in old wood. Children sometimes grew up with a sense of both awe and fear, their earliest memories shaped by the lessons of caution, their playfulness edged with an understanding of risk. Adults too wore the signs of this worry, a furrowed brow, a wary glance at the horizon, a silent calculation of how much wood, water, or food would be needed to last another season. Stories were a comfort and a warning, tales of years when snow buried homes to the roof, when storms toppled forests or left towns hungry, became part of the family's memory. These stories were told on cold nights, not just to scare but to teach, to endure, to adapt, to plan and to hope, even when the world seemed stacked against you. And yet, there was an unspoken pride in having survived. Every battered fence rebuilt, every field coaxed into harvest, every animal kept safe through winter was a small triumph, a statement that for one more year the land had not won. The bond with the land was complex, it could be cruel, but it was also beautiful and generous, rewarding patience and ingenuity with moments of peace, bounty and wonder. As dawn crept across the fields, lighting the mist above river and meadow, there was a sense of renewal, however brief. The world was wild and hard, but it was also a canvas of possibility. Families rose to meet it once more, tired but determined, shaped by a life that asked for everything, and sometimes gave something precious in return: a harvest, a calm season, or simply the quiet beauty of the land at peace for a single morning. The map of colonial America was vast, dotted with settlements that, while busy in their own right, were often separated from each other by miles of forest, river, field, and wild unknown. Even the most bustling village could feel like an island, the nearest neighbor's lantern a distant glimmer through dark trees. As much as the colonial world demanded strength and resilience, it also asked its people to bear the quiet, steady weight of separation from loved ones, from the places they once called home, and sometimes from the very sense of belonging that gave life its sweetness. Every day was marked by moments of longing, brief, sharp, or sometimes dull and persistent, like an ache that never quite left. Letters, when they came, were rare and treasured. Weeks, sometimes months, might pass between news from a parent, a sibling, or a childhood friend. When a letter finally arrived, the world seemed to stop for a moment, as its seal was broken and the words written by a faraway hand, carrying the warmth and worries of another life, were read aloud, shared and read again in the glow of the evening fire. But in the long stretches of silence, the mind filled in the gaps with hope, with worry, and with memory. A mother might wonder how her parents fared back in the old country, her thoughts drifting to the house she'd left behind, the garden where she once played as a girl, the sound of her mother's voice singing at dusk. A father, miles from the town where he grew up, might remember old friends, the crack of laughter over mugs in a dim tavern, the easy comfort of familiarity that now seemed so distant and rare. Travel, as always, was slow, difficult, and dangerous. A visit home meant weeks of planning, money saved for the journey, and the acceptance that the trip itself would be a trial. The news carried along the roads was often old by the time it arrived, reshaped by every mouth it passed through, carrying with it the odd comfort of rumor, but rarely the reassurance of truth. For many, this distance was a kind of silent grief. Weddings, births, even funerals, those most important markers of life, were often missed. A sister might marry and begin her own family, a father pass away, a child be born or lost, all without the presence of those who would have comforted or celebrated together in another time and place. The sadness of these absences was real, but so too was the quiet pride in enduring them, in building something new and meaningful out of loneliness. Community events became all the more precious for this reason. A barn raising, a harvest festival, a market day, These were not just chances to work or trade, but moments to gather, to remember that life continued even in isolation. Stories and songs from the old country were passed down, connecting children to ancestors they'd never meet, giving shape and meaning to the endless cycle of work and worry. In the soft hum of a hymn, in the warmth of a neighbor's hand on your shoulder, in the laughter around a shared meal, people found ways to weave connection out of absence. But the nights could be long, especially for those who lived far from any settlement. After the fire was banked, and the door latched, the dark pressed in from all sides, and the only voices were those within the walls. The world outside was full of sounds: wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the creak of wood as the house settled. In that quiet, thoughts turned inward, circling back to the faces and places left behind. Homesickness was a steady companion, sometimes softened by routine, sometimes sharpened by a stray scent, a remembered song, or the sight of a familiar flower blooming in strange earth. Some coped by telling stories, by teaching their children the language, recipes, or customs of their homeland. Others built new bonds, friendships that began in hardship and deepened over years of shared struggle, becoming as strong as blood. The emotional cost of isolation was not borne alone. Neighbors leaned on each other in times of need, sharing food, work, and comfort when loneliness threatened to overwhelm. Even small kindnesses, a loaf of bread left at the door, a letter carried across miles, a visit on a stormy night, became lifelines, evidence that even in the wildest places, no one was truly forgotten. Some found solace in faith, believing that prayers crossed the distances that people could not. Church was more than a place of worship. It was a space to gather, to sing together, to be seen and to see, to affirm that despite everything, the community endured. The rituals of Sunday, of holidays and holy days, offered moments of unity, shared words, shared meals, shared hope. As years passed, the sting of separation sometimes faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of new roots taking hold. Children born on new soil became the bridge between old world and new, carrying the memories of both and weaving them into something stronger. Still, for many, the ache of distance never truly disappeared. It became part of the music of daily life, a quiet harmony to every joy and every sorrow. In this world, dreams were often tinged with memory. A woman might dream of her childhood home, waking with tears in her eyes and the taste of her mother's bread on her tongue. A man might dream of a lost friend, or of the sea he crossed so many years before, the sound of waves and gulls mingling with the dawn chorus outside his window. Even in sleep, the distances lingered, gentle but insistent, a reminder that every gain came at a cost. But there was resilience too in this endless negotiation with absence. People learned to celebrate what they had, to cherish the moments of togetherness, to hold tight to every letter, every visit, every moment of shared understanding. In the quiet hours before sleep, families might hold hands and pray, not just for their own safety, but for the loved ones far away, sending hope out into the dark like a lantern against the night. And so, the people of colonial America endured, not just the challenges of land and labor, but the harder burdens of the heart, distance, longing, and the slow, steady work of building connection in a world that so often pulled people apart. In the end, it was this effort, quiet, persistent, often unseen, that gave colonial life its peculiar strength. The knowledge that even across great distances, even in the loneliest places, the human heart could endure, remember, and hope. As the months and years drifted by in colonial America, the challenge of distance never truly faded. Even for those who settled into new routines and formed bonds with neighbors, a part of their heart always lived somewhere else across the ocean, in a village now only remembered in stories, or with family members and friends whose faces grew fainter with every season. The mind, when left idle for a moment, wandered back to old fields and familiar rooms, to the patterns of light in a childhood window, or the laughter of a loved one long gone. For some, homesickness ebbed and flowed like the tides, strongest at night or during holidays, when traditions from the old country surfaced, blending comfort and pain. A single scent, a stew bubbling on the hearth, herbs drying in the rafters, wood smoke after a rain, could trigger memories so vivid, they left a person breathless, caught between two worlds. Even joy was complicated. A child's first steps or a wedding feast felt sweeter and sadder, when shared only with new friends. While the faces of family far away lived only in recollection, people found countless ways to cope. Some channeled their longing into hard work, filling every waking hour with tasks that left them too tired for sorrow. Fields were tilled, fences mended, looms threaded, and preserves canned with a kind of desperate purpose. the steady rhythm of labor dulling the ache of distance. Others became storytellers, gathering children around the hearth to pass down tales of old homes and ancestors, stories that grew richer, more detailed, and sometimes more fantastical as the years went on. Storytelling became a form of connection, a bridge between what was lost and what was being built. Children learned about grandparents they would never meet, about festivals in distant lands, about rivers and mountains and streets whose names they'd never see for themselves. In this way, memory and longing were woven into the fabric of colonial life, creating a sense of belonging that reached beyond blood and geography. There were also rituals of remembrance. Some families planted a tree from seeds brought across the ocean, tending it year after year as a living link to the old country. Others kept a box of keepsakes, a piece of lace, a lock of hair, a yellowed letter, or a prayer book inscribed with a loved one's name. These objects became talismans, touched for comfort, shown to guests, hidden away in moments of grief. But longing could also create new bonds. The loneliness of separation drove people to seek out community, to form friendships deeper than mere convenience. A neighbor who had lost a child, a woman widowed in a new world, a man who had left everyone behind to start fresh, all found each other in shared struggle. In the exchange of small kindnesses, a new kind of family formed, not one of blood, but of choice and circumstance, held together by the quiet understanding that no one survived alone. Feasts and gatherings became crucial to the rhythm of life. A barn dance, a quilting bee, a harvest festival. Each event was more than just entertainment. It was a way to remind everyone, especially the lonely, that they belonged. On these nights, the music was louder, the stories longer, and the sense of connection stronger. Even strangers were welcomed, for who could say whose face might someday be missed, whose absence might become another ache in the heart of the community. Faith, too, offered comfort. Hymns sung in small churches or around the hearth reminded people that prayers could cross oceans and forests, that hope was not limited by distance. Passages read aloud from Bibles or prayer books became a way to send love outward, a kind of invisible thread that tied families and friends together across miles and years. Yet the effort to stay connected was never simple. Letters, when they could be written, carried the weight of longing. News of crops and weather, births and deaths, confessions of love, and sometimes carefully hidden sorrows. The act of writing was itself a comfort, a moment to imagine the face of the person who would one day read the words. Waiting for a reply was an act of patience and faith, each week stretching longer as hope mingled with doubt. The isolation sometimes led to melancholy, a greyness that settled over the mind, making the days seem longer, and the world feel smaller. On those days people leaned harder on each other, drawing warmth from a neighbor's visit or a child's laughter, trusting that the ache would pass. The seasons helped, spring brought new chores and new hope, summer demanded constant labor, autumn celebrated survival, and winter encouraged introspection and the comfort of shared stories. Over time, some found that longing softened into gratitude. They looked around at the land they had claimed, the homes they had built, the families they had raised, and felt pride in what had been made from loneliness and want. New traditions took root. Thanksgiving feasts, town meetings, maypole dances, each one a mark of resilience, a way of saying we are still here, we are still together, we have made a place for ourselves. Still, there were always quiet moments, at sunset, or in the hush after a storm, or in the silence before sleep, when the old ache returned. People honored it, even as they endured it, for in those moments, the story of colonial America was written not just in struggle and survival, but in the endless hopeful effort to stay connected, to remember and to be remembered, to hold each other close even across great distances and years. And so, day by day, with every letter sent, every meal shared, every story told, the people of colonial America built not just homes and towns, but a web of connection strong enough to outlast sorrow, strong enough to carry them through another night, and into the dawn of a new day. In the end, the greatest challenge for those who lived in colonial America was not just surviving the present, but believing in the future. A future that could not be seen, that depended on their work, their choices, and 1,000 moments of luck and perseverance. The effort to build something lasting, something that would endure beyond the next harvest, the next winter, the next wave of hardship, was its own form of exhaustion, heavy and humbling. Each day the people of the colonies rose before dawn, stretching sore muscles, squinting into the grey morning, and setting about their endless rounds of chores. They tilled rocky soil with handmade tools, mended fences battered by wind and rain, patched roofs, split wood, and coaxed food from a land that sometimes gave freely, sometimes not at all. Every small gain, a full barrel of corn, a healthy calf, a well-built barn, was celebrated not as an end, but as a foundation for the next task. The next year, the next generation, there was little room for waste or idleness. Every scrap of cloth was saved, every seed counted, every tool cared for and repaired. Children were taught to look ahead, to think of what might be needed in the cold months or the hungry spring, to never let comfort lull them into complacency. The work of today was always done with an eye toward tomorrow, and yet, the future was never guaranteed. Illness could sweep through a household, a storm could flatten the fields, a fire could consume a lifetime's work in minutes. A neighbor might move away, leaving an empty house behind. A loved one might be lost to accident, disease, or the endless push of westward expansion. The uncertainty was constant, a quiet current beneath the noise of everyday life, urging caution and humility. Still, there was hope, sometimes loud and determined, sometimes quiet and shy. It lived in the planting of a new orchard, the setting aside of flour and salt for a wedding, the building of a bigger table, in expectation of children yet to come. It lived in the letters sent across the sea, in the promises made at church, in the dreams whispered at night by the fireside. Hope took root in the soil itself, in the careful tending of gardens and fields, in the stubborn belief that, with enough effort, this wild land could be made to yield not just food but comfort, beauty and peace. Flowers were planted at the edge of vegetable patches, their colors a small rebellion against the monotony of necessity. Shade trees were set beside houses, not just for shelter, but for future generations who might rest beneath them. Communities built schools and meeting houses, marking the passage of time with lessons, sermons, and gatherings. Evenings were spent not only in work, but in the teaching of reading, writing, and numbers, a quiet investment in children's minds, a hope that they would know more and do better than their parents had. Towns kept records, wrote laws, chose leaders, and debated the future with a seriousness that belied their small numbers and scattered homes. Dreams were shaped not by what was, but by what might be. A new field cleared, a loom set up in the corner of a cabin, a chest of linens packed away for a daughter's marriage. Each was a sign that despite all the exhaustion and uncertainty, people believed in the possibility of something better. Songs were sung that looked ahead as well as back, blending old melodies with new words, reminding everyone that they were part of a story that would continue. The cost of hope was real. Every dream required sacrifice, sleep missed for work, comforts forgone, risks taken, and often heartbreak endured when plans unraveled. There were seasons when all seemed lost, when the future looked too distant to reach, and only the sheer momentum of habit and duty carried people forward. On such days the work itself became a kind of prayer. Each shovel of earth, each loaf of bread, each lullaby sung in the darkness, a plea for the strength to keep going. But there were rewards too in this slow, stubborn striving. The taste of fruit from a tree planted years before, the pride in a barn raised with neighbors' help, the warmth of children growing strong, the gathering of friends around a table set with food grown, cooked and served by their own hands. There was comfort in the knowledge that, while the world was vast and uncertain, something had been built, something that might last, that might shelter and feed, and give joy for years to come. At night, when the day's labor was done, and the only sounds were the breathing of loved ones, and the quiet settling of the house, people let themselves dream. They imagined a future where their children would have more, an easier life, a safer home, a place in a world they had helped shape with their own cool-used hands and aching backs. They hoped for a time when the land would be tamed, when danger would recede, when there would be room for rest as well as work, for laughter as well as worry. Some wrote these hopes in letters, some carved them in wood, some passed them along, in stories told again and again, reshaped by each new teller, strengthened by each new challenge. In this way, hope survived the worst winters, the hardest years, the loneliest nights. It became the true legacy of colonial America, not the grand monuments or famous names, but the quiet determination of ordinary people to keep going, to build and to believe, to find meaning in the endless cycle of effort and renewal. And so, in the final hush before sleep, the people of colonial America rested their tired bodies and restless minds, trusting that their work had not been in vain. They dreamed of futures they would never see, and in that dreaming, found the courage to face another day, another dawn of labor, of laughter, of sorrow, and of stubborn, quiet hope. Hope, in colonial America, was both a burden and a blessing, a quiet ember, kept alive even in the deepest exhaustion. As seasons spun by, as children grew and parents aged, the future was never something distant or abstract. It was present in every moment, woven through daily choices, sacrifices, and acts of faith that would ripple long beyond one's own years. There were nights, especially during the longest winters or after a poor harvest, when hope felt thin as thread. The candlelight flickered low, the house seemed smaller, and worries pressed close. Would there be enough to eat? Would the fields recover? Would the children grow strong and survive where others had not? Yet, even on those nights, someone would murmur a story, hum a song, or say a prayer that reminded the family they were part of something larger and older than their own fear. For many, the greatest comfort was not in grand plans, but in the repetition of small, familiar rituals. The kneading of bread, the planting of seeds, the washing and mending of clothes, each was an act of faith, a promise that tomorrow was worth preparing for. The most ordinary routines, performed with care, carried hope forward one quiet day at a time. Children learned these lessons not by words alone, but by watching the adults around them. They saw their parents' hands, worn and scarred, moving with patient skill. They heard the careful encouragement when a chore was done well, or a lesson learned. They absorbed the subtle ways that disappointment was met, with a sigh perhaps, but also with a renewed effort, a decision to try again the next day. Dreams were rarely spoken aloud, but they showed themselves in the way people tended the land or saved a handful of coins for a special gift. Sometimes the dream was simply to keep the family safe and together through another winter. Other times it reached further, a child who might go to school, a new roof, a thriving orchard, a good marriage. Each generation carried forward the hopes of those before, shaping them to the challenges and changes of a new world. Failures came too, as surely as storms and drought. There were years when crops failed, when illness swept through the settlement, when everything that had been saved was lost in a single accident or fire. Grief ran deep, and sometimes hope seemed lost for good. But slowly, through shared effort and quiet support, families and neighbors found ways to begin again. The rebuilding of a barn, the sharing of a harvest, the lending of tools or seeds. These acts of kindness were small beacons of hope, reminding everyone that community was as essential as food or shelter. In the rare moments of ease, a good harvest, a mild winter, a wedding or a new baby, hope was allowed to shine a little brighter. Laughter echoed louder, songs rose higher, and gratitude filled the air. Even then, the people of colonial America were careful not to tempt fate. Good fortune was celebrated with humility, with prayers of thanks, and a resolve to save against the harder days to come. As years passed and generations shifted, the old struggles faded into story and memory. Grandparents told tales of the first winter, or the great storm of times when hope seemed all but lost. Children listened wide-eyed, finding comfort in the fact that despite it all, the family endured. In these stories, the past became a source of strength, proof that survival was possible, that dreams, however quietly cherished, could sometimes come true. Some hopes never came to pass, and their loss was mourned, but even these left a mark, a lesson in perseverance, a reminder of what mattered most, or the resolve to try a different path. The land itself bore witness to this cycle. Fields cleared, and then left to woods, orchards planted, and sometimes lost, houses raised and sometimes abandoned. Yet, always, somewhere, someone was starting again, believing in the value of their labor, the worth of their dreams. The greatest exhaustion was often invisible, the toll of keeping hope alive when circumstances argued against it, of believing in a future you might never see, of trusting that your effort, patience and love would matter in the end. For every child who lived and thrived, for every field that grew green in spring, for every neighbor who came to your aid in time of need, hope was rewarded, not always in grand triumphs, but in the slow, steady accumulation of days survived, joys savored, and burdens shared. As sleep claimed the tired bodies and busy minds of colonial families, dreams drifted between what was and what could be. In the hush before dawn, a parent's thoughts might turn to a child's future, to a hope planted like a seed, to a faith carried quietly through years of uncertainty. And in that silence, the true heart of colonial America was found, not in battles won or lands claimed, but in the exhausted, enduring hope that by working together and never giving up, a better world could be built. So, as another day began, and the sun crept over fields, rivers and forests, the people of colonial America woke, and began again, carrying with them not just the fatigue of their labors, but the unquenchable hope that, with enough care and patience, tomorrow would be a little kinder, a little brighter, a little more their own. To outsiders, the simple cabins and rough-hewn barns of colonial America might have seemed sturdy and permanent, built to last in the wilderness. But to those who lived in them, these structures were in a constant state of flux, always needing repair, always a little more fragile than they appeared. The quiet exhaustion of colonial life was as much about keeping what you had as it was about gaining anything new. From the moment a house was built, nature set about reclaiming it. Rain found its way beneath shingles and between logs, soaking insulation of moss or clay. Frost pried apart wooden joints, wind rattled shutters and loosened doors. Mice and insects found every gap, turning the smallest crack into a highway. The family inside lived with a permanent list of repairs: leaks to plug, hinges to oil, thatch to replace, chimneys to clear of soot, and birds' nests. Even the best-built home, lovingly tended, always showed the marks of struggle. Outside, barns, fences, sheds, and animal pens demanded just as much attention. Fences sagged under snow, or from the rubbing of cattle. Gates leaned, their latches stubborn or missing altogether. Tools were left out in the rain, or handles split and needed shaping from green wood. Nails were precious and reused again and again, pried from broken boards and hammered into place in new repairs. Children grew up learning the difference between a quick patch and a true fix. A bit of leather might serve as a hinge, a bit of wire to hold a tool together. Shoes were mended until there was almost nothing left of the original leather. Clothes were patched, socks darned, and everything worn until even rags had a use, in cleaning, in bandages, or as stuffing for a drafty wall. Yet, the work of maintenance was more than just labor. It was an education, a slow process of learning how to make do, how to solve problems, how to adapt and improvise. A father taught his son to sharpen a blade, a mother showed her daughter how to turn scraps into sturdy thread, and neighbors swapped advice and clever tricks whenever they met. Newcomers to the colonies quickly learned to ask for help or risk losing what little they had. Tools themselves were precious, and often homemade, or altered from whatever could be found. An axe head might be bought from a blacksmith, but the handle was usually shaped by hand, fitted to the user's grip. When the blade dulled, it was ground on a stone or honed with patience. Broken tools were set aside only when every possibility for repair was exhausted. Some repairs took days, replacing a roof, digging a new well, raising a barn wall toppled by wind. Others were part of the daily rhythm, tightening a wagon wheel before heading to market, checking the latch on the henhouse each night, pounding loose pegs back into the ladder before anyone dared climb. Every task was a negotiation between time, energy, and materials at hand. Often, ingenuity was born of necessity. A broken pot might become a scoop for grain, a cracked window patched with oiled paper, or a square of cloth. Bits of iron or bone were repurposed into buttons, hooks or tools. Nothing was truly thrown away until it had been used and reused, its usefulness wrung out to the last. These small acts of care and creativity brought families together. Evenings were spent around the fire, mending, carving, or whittling, hands busy, while stories and songs filled the air. Children learned patience and pride in their ability to fix what was broken, to keep the family's few possessions in use a little longer. But the pressure was constant. Each season brought new worries: winter cold that split wood and froze water, spring floods that rotted foundations and scattered fences, summer sun that warped boards and dried out leather, autumn winds that tore at roofs and swept debris against the house. There was never a season free from work, never a time when everything was as it should be. Neighbors relied on each other not just for advice, but for labor. A barn raising or roof repair was a community event, everyone lending a hand in the knowledge that soon it would be their turn to need help. Tools and expertise were shared, sometimes traded, sometimes simply given. There was a quiet understanding that survival depended as much on cooperation as on skill. As new materials and methods appeared, better nails, stronger glass, imported paints or fabrics, they were prized, sometimes hoarded, always put to use. But the basic rhythms remained: make do, mend, adapt, repeat. For some, the endless repairs became a point of pride. A well-tended home, a fence kept straight and sturdy, a tool that lasted years beyond its expected life. These were badges of honor, evidence of a family's determination and resourcefulness. For others, the work felt never-ending, a tide that could never quite be held back. There was always something leaning, leaking, or wearing thin. This endless cycle shaped not just the homes and tools, but the people themselves. Colonial Americans grew adaptable, observant, skilled with their hands and their wits. They learned to see potential in scraps, to work with what they had, to ask for help, and to offer it freely. The exhaustion was real, but so was the quiet satisfaction in each small victory. A leak stopped, a shoe mended, a barn wall rebuilt. As night fell, and the fire crackled low, families sat together in the peace brought by another day's repairs. There was always more to do, more that might break or wear out. But for now, the house was warm, the roof was tight, and the walls stood strong against the wild world outside. The cycle would begin again with the dawn. But in this moment, there was rest, pride, and a sense of having held the world together, if only for a little while. The constant task of keeping things in order did more than just fill the hours of each day in colonial America. It quietly shaped the very fabric of family life and the inner lives of those who called this wild land home. To live in a world where everything needed watching, mending, and repurposing was to develop not only a set of skills, but a way of seeing the world that prized resilience, patience, and quiet invention. For many, the day's repairs began before the sun was up. A father, lantern in hand, might check the roof for leaks after a long night of rain, feeling the dampness in the beams and listening for the faintest drip. A mother, apron tied, would look over her family's shoes, turning each one in her hands, checking for worn soles or loose stitching before sending her children out into the mud or snow. Older siblings took on more responsibility each year, learning to spot trouble, a loose fence board, a bucket about to split, the sag of a shelf under too much weight, before it became disaster. Children were taught early that carelessness came at a price. A bucket left outside would swell and crack in the sun. A tool dropped in the grass might rust beyond repair before morning dew burned off. Stories were told of the year the barn roof collapsed under snow, or the time a child's lost mitten meant frost-bitten fingers all winter long. These stories became family legends, cautionary tales repeated every season, as much about survival as about responsibility. Despite the fatigue, there was pride in every small fix. When a patch held through a storm, or a fence survived the push of hungry cattle, a quiet satisfaction filled the house. Even mistakes became teachers. Each failed repair, each botched attempt was a lesson in patience and humility. Over time, families became expert at stretching the life of every object, finding clever uses for every scrap, and sharing the best tricks with neighbors over a mug of cider or a gatepost conversation. But the effort was not just practical, it was deeply emotional. The sight of a father patiently gluing a broken toy, or a mother mending a child's coat by candlelight, became a language of love in a world with few luxuries. Parents passed down not just knowledge, but care, each repair a promise that, no matter how hard life became, no one would be left unprotected. The rhythm of fixing, of adapting and restoring, was a form of security, a thread connecting generations across time. Holidays and seasons were marked by the work of maintenance. Spring meant patching roofs and whitewashing walls. Summer brought fence repairs, new doors, or the digging of fresh wells. Autumn saw the sharpening of blades, the stacking of firewood, the checking of every hinge and latch before winter closed in. Even the shortest days were full of motion, boots to mend, tools to sharpen, windows to seal against the cold. Sometimes the work of repair was communal, a chance to gather and share burdens. When a neighbor's barn collapsed in a storm, men from all around would come to help raise a new one, sharing tools and expertise, laughter and stories. Women brought food and advice, patched torn clothes for tired workers, and watched children who ran through the grass with hammers and wooden pegs. These moments became memories, proof that even as everything wore out and fell apart, people could hold each other together. Yet for all the camaraderie, there was a loneliness to the endless cycle. The knowledge that nothing lasted, that everything demanded more work, weighed heavy at times. Some nights as a storm howled or snow crept up the door, a mother or father might wonder if the effort was worth it, if all their mending and patching would ever lead to peace or security. But in the morning, the work began again, because it had to, and because in the doing, a kind of hope was born. Children grew up into the same habits, carrying the family's tricks and traditions into their own lives. Some left home with a bundle of patched clothes and a head full of advice. Always oil the hinges before winter, never waste a nail, keep your best tools clean and dry. Others stayed, becoming the new caretakers of the old house, teaching their own children to see the world through eyes trained to notice what needed mending. Innovation was born of necessity. Families invented new tools, new ways to use old materials, new games and songs to keep children entertained while they worked. The cycle of maintenance became a canvas for creativity, a way to turn hardship into pride, scarcity into abundance, and effort into something lasting. Some of these inventions traveled far, shared in letters or at market days, shaping the very character of the colonies as a land of inventors and adapters. But always the work returned. As one thing was fixed, another broke. As one problem was solved, a new challenge arose. Even in moments of rest, eyes drifted to the crack in the wall, the loose board, the shoe needing another patch. The world outside was always shifting, always asking for one more effort, one more solution, one more lesson in patience. Still, in the quiet at the end of the day, when the fire burned low and the house was warm and dry, there was a peace that came from knowing you had done what you could. The cycle would begin again tomorrow, but for now, the roof held, the walls stood, and the family was together. In that moment, all the weariness faded, replaced by the quiet pride of having mended, endured, and for one more night, kept the world at bay.